हो गया सर, इधर दोनों ऑन हो गए। थैंक यू वेरी मच। फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आई वेलकम और जो एक्सटीम्ड स्पीकर हैं हमारे सीए डॉक्टर केश गुप्ता जी, सीए दीपेंद्र मोहन जी एंड माय को पैनलिस्ट गौरव गुप्ता जी। आई अश्विनी जिंदल ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट एसोसिएशन and voice of CA welcome you all on this program specially designed for members requirement। आज की डेट में प्रोग्रामों से तो लोग ऐसे डरते हैं, जैसे आप कहते हो ना कि किसी को कहते हो वेबिनार में जाना है, वो कहता है यार बस छोड़ दो मेरे को, इतना घबरा गए हैं 3 साल में वेबिनारों से। लेकिन ये हमारा मतलब सौभाग्य है कि हमारे प्रोग्राम में आज की डेट में विदाउट सीपी आवर प्रोग्राम है। इवन दो हमारी संख्या नॉर्मली बिटवीन 300 to 500 ऑलवेज रहती है इन दीज डेज विदाउट सीपीआर। हम सब जानते हैं कि आज की डेट में सभी रिटर्न्स में बिजी हैं। क्यों? क्योंकि हमारा होता है कि जो करंट बर्निंग टॉपिक्स हैं हम उनको लें। ऐसे नहीं है कि हमने खाना पूर्ति के लिए सेमिनार करने हैं, कोई हम इंस्टीट्यूट से बंधे हुए नहीं है कि वहां के काउंसिल मेंबरों का फोन आएगा ब्रांच में कि जी हमारा प्रोग्राम कर दो। उनको 32 काउंसिल मेंबरों के प्रोग्राम तो इसलिए करने पड़ते हैं कि वो काउंसिल मेंबर हैं। तो आप समझ के चलो कि साल में 32 प्रोग्राम तो इंस्टीट्यूट के ऐसे ही हो जाते हैं कि जी काउंसिल मेंबर आ रहे हैं, तो उसमें आपको टॉपिक कम, पॉलिटिक्स ज्यादा मिलती है। यहाँ पे आपको सिर्फ टॉपिक ही मिलेगा। इस वजह से नहीं, क्योंकि हमने स्पीकर भी आपके लिए वी हैव ट्राइड अवर बेस्ट। जैसे 194 RS पे गिरीश उज्जा जी का भी प्रोग्राम हमने करवाया, अभी डॉक्टर केश गुप्ता जी का करवाने जा रहे हैं। देन क्लोज 44 पे हमने प्रमोद जैन जी को स्पेशली टॉपिक के लिए बुलाया, उसके बाद संजय अग्रवाल जी का करवाया। आज हम दीपेंद्र मोहन जी को हमने रिक्वेस्ट की है कि क्लोज 44 के ऊपर आपको क्लैरिटी दें कि कैसे इसको हैंडल करना है। अभी आप सबको बता दूं कि एक्सपोजर ड्राफ्ट भी आ चुका है आईसीआई का, गाइडेंस नोट ऑन टैक्स ऑडिट रिपोर्ट, तो उसको भी उसकी लाइट में हमने इसको क्लोज को कैसे हैंडल करना है उसके बारे में भी दीपेंद्र मोहन जी आपको बताएंगे। देन ITR U में आज भी हमारे क्वेश्चन अनआंसर्ड हैं कि क्या हम 5 लाख से कम की रिटर्न भर सकते हैं। अभी मेरे को किसी ने बताया कि जी 25 रुपए टैक्स की रिटर्न चली गई, अब उसके सॉफ्टवेयर की दिक्कत है, जब 25 रुपए से जा सकती है। ये सभी चीजें आपको दीपेंद्र मोहन जी बताएंगे। अगर 25 रुपए में जा सकती है तो फिर हमें रिटर्न भर देनी चाहिए। अगर किसी की रह गई है, जो हम डिमांड कर रहे थे कि जी रिवाइज रिटर्न नहीं जाती तो सॉरी बिलेटेड रिटर्न नहीं जाती, ये सारी चीजें हमारी रिजोल्व हो जाएंगी। तो बड़े इशू हैं। तो मैं मेंबर्स का ग्रेटफुल हूं कि अभी संख्या एट प्रेजेंट, अभी हमने जस्ट स्टार्ट किया है तो 2007 संख्या हो चुकी है। तो आई होप कि आज जो हमारी लिमिट लास्ट टाइम की तरह 500 विद इन फ्यू मिनट कंप्लीट हो जाएगी। तो मैं आप सबका स्वागत करते हुए सबसे पहले, हालांकि आज हमने सीक्वेंस थोड़ी डिफरेंट कर दी है, गुरु जो हम डॉक्टर केश गुप्ता जी का हमने बाद में पहले रखा था, तो इनका सर का बाद में है, अभी दीपेंद्र मोहन जी का पहले है। तो मैं एज ए प्रोटोकॉल ही रिज्यूम जो प्रोफाइल है इनका वो भी अकॉर्डिंगली ही पढ़ूंगा। दीपेंद्र मोहन जी जो हमारे हैं वो ही इज 51 ईयर, मैं कहूँ कि मेरे बराबर ही हैं, मैं भी अब 51 में एंटर कर गया हूँ। एंड ही इज अ फेलो मेंबर ऑफ द इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट ऑफ इंडिया। और स्पेशली मैं आपको जैसे पहले कहा कि हमारे पॉलिटिकल वेबिनार नहीं, हमने इनको स्पेशली आगरा से बुलाया है आउट ऑफ द रीजन। कोई ऐसे नहीं है कि हमने NIRC वालों को प्रमोट कर रहे हैं कि भैया इलेक्शनों में आना है। तो थैंक यू सर कि आप हमारे दूसरे रीजन में भी सर्विस दे रहे हो हमारे मेंबर्स को। ही साइंस ग्रेजुएट, तो ये पूरी चीरफाड़ भी अच्छी तरह करेंगे, साइंस में अच्छी तरह जानते हैं अकाउंटिंग को कैसे चीरफाड़ करनी है। ही इज फ्रॉम आगरा यूनिवर्सिटी। तो मैं अभी देख रहा था इन्होंने अभी अपनी एमरल्ड यूनिवर्सिटी भी सॉरी जुबली भी सेलिब्रेट की है दिस ईयर। फर्म की जो है SN गुप्ता एंड कंपनी की आगरा में जो इनकी एस्टेब्लिश्ड है। ही हैज आल्सो डन डिप्लोमा इन इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम ऑडिट, फोरेंसिक ऑडिट, and he is a member of regional direct tax advisory committee and closely associated with the central board of direct taxes, and also a member of the UP self finance independent school fees regulatory committee। ये सोशल कॉज में भी काफी आगे हैं, which regulates fees of schools in UP and other Agra and other districts as well। He was a nominated independent advisory board member of the minimum wages committee under the Ministry of Labor and Employment, Government of India। Mr. Mohan has been special interest in the field of taxation and audit, with special emphasis on charitable and educational institution। तो इनको हम सर आपको इसके लिए भी कष्ट देंगे, चैरिटेबल एंड एजुकेशनल में भी बहुत क्वेश्चन लोगों के रहते हैं, स्पेशली इन द फील्ड ऑफ अकाउंटिंग टैक्सेशन में तो मास्टरी है सर की। ही हैज मेड वेरियस प्रेजेंटेशन टू ऑनरेबल फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर, स्टेट फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर, यूनियन रेवेन्यू सेक्रेटरी एज वेल एज सीबीडीटी, एंड ही इज आल्सो सोशल पर्सन लाइक अस एंड सर्विंग द प्रोफेशन। डॉक्टर साहब के बारे में भी मैं आपको साथ में इंट्रोड्यूस करा दूं। डॉक्टर साहब को आप सब जानते हो कि जब भी आप इनकी किताब पढ़ते हो तो ज्यादातर जब आप किताबें पढ़ते हो ना तो आपको दूसरे पेज से कंटेंट मिल जाता है। इनकी किताब में जाके 25वें पेज पे कंटेंट मिलता है, क्योंकि 24 पेज का तो इनका बायोडाटा है। इतना बड़ा प्रोफाइल है, कोई ऐसा डिग्री नहीं है जो इन्होंने दी ना हो, चाहे वो सीए है, सीएस है, आईसीडब्ल्यू है, देन उसके बाद पीएचडी है, देन उसके बाद डॉक्टरेट है, सभी डिग्री हैं डॉक्टर साहब के पास हैं। तो इनका पहले तो आपको 24 पेजेस का बायोडाटा पढ़ना पड़ता है कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट की जजमेंटें हों, कहीं भी हों, एवरीवेयर यू विल फाइंड डॉक्टर केश गुप्ता जी। ही हाई स्कूल मेरिट पोजीशन, जब आप डाटा पढ़ने लगोगे इनका प्रोफाइल तो देन फर्स्ट रैंक इन द यूनिवर्सिटी, एफसीए, एफसीएस, आईसीडब्ल्यूए, एमबीए, एमबीए में भूल ही गया था सर, एलएलबी, एलएलएम, पीएचडी। He was appointed member of the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal at the age of 37। अभी आप 37 के ही लगते हो सर। Posted at Hyderabad but resigned later on। Co-authored with his partner Dr. Raj K Agarwal जी। He has authored 3 books। उसमें 2 मेरे पास आई हुई हैं, तीसरी मैं सर से मंगवाऊंगा। तो सर्च एंड सीजर की मैं काम करता नहीं, तो इसलिए सर्च एंड सीजर शायद इन्होंने भेजी नहीं होगी भी कहाँ आप जिंदल साहब इसमें जमेले में पकड़ोगे। तो ही हैज ऑथर्ड 3 बुक्स, सर्च एंड सीजर एंड असेसमेंट ऑफ सर्च केसेस, देन टैक्सेशन ऑफ रियल स्टेट डेवलपर्स एंड जॉइंट डेवलपमेंट एग्रीमेंट विद जॉइंट डेवलपमेंट एग्रीमेंट के इन लाइट ऑफ दैट। देन रिसेंटली ही हैज ऑथर्ड बुक ऑन ब्लैक मनी। बड़ी स्पेसिफिक टॉपिक स्पेसिफिक बुक्स हैं, ऐसे नहीं है कि जनरल इनकम टैक्स पे आपको टॉपिक स्पेसिफिक बुक्स मिलेंगी डॉक्टर साहब की। तो he has participated in the United Nations Committee of the Experts on International Corporation in Tax Matters, held at UN headquarters in New York, at regional headquarters in Geneva in October 2018. He is member of International Association of Tax Judges and participated in the meeting held at Finland in October 2017 and Cambridge, UK in September 19, invited to address Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Finance Bill, and he has delivered many lectures and he is appearing on behalf of clients in the Honorable Supreme Court as well as High Court, practicing as an advocate. I welcome you, sir. Also, sir will deliberate about 5:45 or between 6 o'clock. First deliberation is by Dipender Mohan ji. Without wasting much of the time, I request Dipender Mohan ji to kindly start the deliberation.
Thank you, Jindal Sahab. And my esteemed learned speaker for today evening, Dr. Rakesh Gupta ji, whom I consider my guru and has been really mentoring all the CAs in the country with his good deliberations and to the point deliberations, I would rather say to at this point. At today's webinar, when Jindal ji spoke to me about taking clause 44 and about the updated returns, we discussed as to what has to be taken up first, and I think I should be taking up the updated return concept which has been brought in for the first time by Finance Act 2022, which says that now, since we all know that the government or rather the income tax department is trying to shorten the time frame for filing of the returns, and that is why, as per the current law which is there, you have time period till December to file the returns. So till July, the individual returns are to be filed. Then October, the audited returns are to be filed, and so forth. So till 30th of November, the returns which are under 92E of international of transfer pricing, they have to be filed. And subsection 139 subsection 4 and subsection 5 have been amended. Belated return अब जो है हम फाइल कर सकते हैं सेक्शन 139(4) में by before 3 months of the end of the assessment year. That means by 31st December हमको अब belated return फाइल करना है. And revised return under section 139(5) has to be filed also, can be revised also by 31st December of the assessment year where the return has to be filed. Now, since the timelines for filing the returns have been reduced significantly, and so the government wanted that better compliance should be done, and for reducing litigation, they proposed and they have had a new section 139(8)(a), whereby filing of updated returns has been made available to the assessee, which says that the assessee can file a return, updated return, within 24 months of the end of the assessment year. उन्होंने कहा कि 24 महीने के अंदर एंड ऑफ द असेसमेंट ईयर से आप एक अपना अपडेटेड रिटर्न अगर चाहें तो फाइल कर सकते हैं, even when you have not filed the original return or you want to file the updated return of the original return. So you can even file the return, that means you can even file the return after 31st December in the current assessment year itself. So that is a major change which has been brought in by the section 139(8)(a). 139(8)(a) में इसलिए चेंज लाए कि असेसमेंट की जो टाइमलाइंस थी, जो रिटर्न्स की जो टाइमलाइंस फाइलिंग की थी वो बहुत शॉर्टेंड हो गई थी, इसलिए 139(8)(a) लेकर आए, and to reduce litigation. अब how the litigation would be reduced, if we read the budget memorandum when it came, उन्होंने कहा कि अब बोर्ड के पास काफी डिजिटल डेटा अवेलेबल है. आप और हम देख रहे हैं कि एनुअल इंफॉर्मेशन स्टेटमेंट के द्वारा जो डिजिटल डेटा गवर्नमेंट के पास आ रहा है वो काफी स्पेसिफिक है. और अभी तो AIS के अंदर लेटेस्ट जो एडिशन हुआ है वो आपकी GST की जो परचेजेस हैं वो भी AIS के अंदर आने लग गई हैं. सो दैट मीन्स कि अगर कोई अपना GST का रिटर्न भी अपडेट कर रहा है आपका सप्लायर, तो उसकी इंफॉर्मेशन भी आपके एनुअल इंफॉर्मेशन स्टेटमेंट में आ रही है. विद दैट they say that the digital data which is available with them, so they want to ask the assessee that if he has missed out something, agar usse kuch cheez miss ho rahi hai and the assessee wants to come clean before the department, then they have given an option of updated return, definitely with some pinch of salt. uske sath unhone kuch uske sath additional tax bhi lagaya hai, wo I'll explain it to you a bit further. Now we have to see कि updated return कौन फाइल कर सकता है. सबसे अच्छी चीज है इसमें updated return can be filed by any person. Person, as we all know, income tax act में defined है individual, HUF, partnership firm, company, trusts, societies, ये सब person की definition में आती हैं. तो इसमें कोई restriction नहीं है कि X फाइल कर सकता है या Y फाइल कर सकता है. All assessees are allowed to file a updated return. और updated return फाइल करने की टाइम पीरियड है 24 months from the end of the assessment year, जिसका आपको updated return फाइल करना है. इसमें 2-3 कंडीशंस हैं कि किस कंडीशन में updated return फाइल नहीं हो सकता. अगर रिटर्न updated return आपका लॉस का है, ओरिजिनल रिटर्न हो सकता है आपका लॉस का हो, बट अगर आप उसको प्रॉफिट में कन्वर्ट कर रहे हैं तो आप अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल कर सकते हैं, बट लॉस का अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल नहीं हो सकता. ये एक इंपॉर्टेंट बात है. कहीं उस अपडेटेड रिटर्न से असेसी की टैक्स लायबिलिटी तो रिड्यूस नहीं हो रही, देन द अपडेटेड रिटर्न कैन नॉट बी फाइल्ड. और द अपडेटेड रिटर्न के द्वारा असेसी को ज्यादा रिफंड मिल रहा है या जो पुराना रिफंड मिला था वो बढ़ रहा है. सो मीनिंग देयरबाय दैट द अपडेटेड रिटर्न कैन ओनली बी फाइल्ड for the benefit of the department, जहां डिपार्टमेंट को टैक्स ज्यादा मिल रहा है, उस कंडीशन में आप अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल कर सकते हैं. उस कंडीशन में नहीं कर सकते कि सपोज आपका कोई क्लेम मिस कर गए आप या कोई डिडक्शन लेना मिस कर गए, उस कंडीशन में आप चाहें कि मैं अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल कर लूं, तो उस कंडीशन में आप अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल नहीं कर सकते. अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल करने के लिए उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि अब जिसने अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल किया हुआ है अपना एक बार, वो दोबारा अपना रिटर्न अपडेट नहीं कर सकता. So that means revision of an updated return is not allowed under the provisions of section 139(8)(a). Further, they say that if any assessment, reassessment or recomputation or revision of income is pending, or for that assessment, a relevant assessment year, then also updated return cannot be filed. Now a mute question comes कि आपके पास 148A में subsection B का notice आ गया है that the department has some information, और वो show cause notice आपको दिया जा रहा है कि ये information department के पास है. What do you want to say? You have to file the objections or not, so that the order under section 148 can be passed and your case can be reopened. क्या ये stage मेरे लिए updated return file करने की stage है? To my understanding, yes. Here you can file an updated return and come clean before the department before they initiate proceedings under section 148A, because वहां वो कह रहे हैं कि assessment, reassessment proceedings start नहीं होनी चाहिए, pending नहीं होनी चाहिए, and show cause notice is no proceedings for this purpose. So in my opinion, you can file an updated return अगर आपके पास initial show cause notice आया है, definitely with an amount of tax which is 25% to 50% depending upon the time frame within which the return is to be updated. Further, they say that updated return cannot be filed where the return or there is information in possession of the department that you have some smugglers, foreign exchange manipulators act में कहीं आपने काम किया हुआ है, या prohibition of बेनामी property transactions act में आप involvement है, या prevention of money laundering act या black money act यहाँ है, प्लस कोई इंफॉर्मेशन फॉरेन सोर्सेज से जो एक्सचेंज ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन हो रही है उसके तहत कोई इंफॉर्मेशन आई हुई है अगर डिपार्टमेंट के पास, तो भी आप बिलेटेड रिटर्न फाइल नहीं कर सकते. और एनी प्रोसिक्यूशन प्रोसीडिंग्स आर देयर, देन आल्सो द रिटर्न कैन नॉट बी फाइल्ड फॉर द रिलेवेंट असेसमेंट ईयर. नाउ वी हैव टू कम दैट एंड सी दैट इवन इन केसेस ऑफ सर्च एंड सर्वेज बिलेटेड रिटर्न कैन नॉट बी फाइल्ड except for TDS survey, because TDS survey को वो generally मानते हैं कि it's TDS verification not a survey. So TDS survey के अलावा आप अपना belated return अगर आपके यहाँ search या survey हो गया है तो उस assessment year के लिए या उसके preceding कोई भी assessment year के लिए आप फाइल नहीं कर सकते. बजट मेमोरेंडम में 2 assessment years आए थे, बट जब एक्ट आया तो उन्होंने any assessment year preceding the year of search और survey कर दिया है. So search survey वाले assessees भी और 132A में जहां रिक्विजिशन हुआ है वो असेसीज भी अपने बिलेटेड रिटर्न फाइल नहीं कर सकते. सो दीज वर द ऑप्शंस वेयर अ बिलेटेड रिटर्न वाज कैन नॉट बी फाइल्ड. नाउ आई विल टेक यू एज टू हाउ द बिलेटेड रिटर्न हैज टू बी फाइल्ड. अब बिलेटेड रिटर्न फाइल करने के लिए यूटिलिटी आ गई है, आप अपना बिलेटेड रिटर्न फाइल कर सकते हैं प्रोवाइडेड दैट द टैक्सेस ड्यू एज पर बिलेटेड रिटर्न हैव बीन पेड बिफोर फाइलिंग ऑफ रिटर्न. ये चेंज लाए हैं ये लोग सेक्शन 140B कैपिटल बी जो लेकर आए हैं, वेयर टैक्सेस को हाउ टैक्सेस हैव टू बी पेड एंड व्हाट इज द क्वांटम ऑफ टैक्स टू बी पेड वो डिफाइन किया गया है. वहां पे उन्होंने कहा कि बिलेटेड रिटर्न अगर आप फाइल कर रहे हैं देन इफ इट इज फाइल्ड बिफोर 12 months ऑफ द एंड ऑफ द असेसमेंट ईयर, देन जो एडिशनल टैक्स है प्लस इंटरेस्ट जो है उसका 25% एज एडिशनल अमाउंट आपको और जमा कराना पड़ेगा. एंड इफ द टाइम पीरियड फॉर फाइलिंग द अपडेटेड रिटर्न इज 24 months, 12 months से 24 महीने के बीच में है, तो आपको 50% ऑफ द एडिशनल अमाउंट ऑफ द इनकम टैक्स, एडिशनल इनकम टैक्स एंड इंटरेस्ट जो बनता है वो देना होगा. नाउ द क्वेश्चन कम्स एज टू हाउ द इंटरेस्ट एंड द एडिशनल इनकम टैक्स वुड बी कैलकुलेटेड. जैसे कि जो अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल कर रहे हैं आप, अपडेटेड रिटर्न में जो आपकी टैक्स कंप्यूट होगी उसको आप अपने ओरिजिनल रिटर्न से कंपेयर करेंगे, और जहां ओरिजिनल रिटर्न से आपने कंपेयर किया जो टैक्स का डिफरेंस आया वो टैक्स का डिफरेंस एडिशनल टैक्स बनेगा. आपका जो टैक्स 139(8)A में बन रहा है उस पे आपको 25% पे करना है, प्लस इंटरेस्ट को भी ऐसे ही कैलकुलेट करना है. 234A, B, C तीनों की इंटरेस्ट लगेगी. अब यहाँ सवाल ये आता है कि 234A की इंटरेस्ट आपकी उस पीरियड तक लगेगी जहां तक आपका ओरिजिनल रिटर्न अगर टाइम से फाइल्ड है, सो देन 234A नहीं लगेगा आपके ऊपर, देन 234B एंड 234C लगेगा आपके ऊपर। एंड जो आपने ये इंटरेस्ट अपने ओरिजिनल रिटर्न में पे करी हुई है उसको रिड्यूस कर दीजिएगा इस इंटरेस्ट कंपोनेंट से, दैट वुड बी द एक्स्ट्रा इंटरेस्ट व्हिच यू हैव टू पे अंडर सेक्शन 140 कैपिटल B. So this is about regarding the belated return, regarding the updated return, sorry, this is regarding the updated return as to how and who all can file the updated return. Here the government feels that lot of litigation where previously at many times we also used to see in our daily practice that assessee आता था आपके पास पूछने को कि कुछ चीज रह गई है उसकी और आप उसको दर्शाना है, जैसे कैपिटल गेन्स का अमाउंट हुआ या कभी कभी कैपिटल गेन्स जॉइंट प्रॉपर्टी में उसका बिका है और उसमें कैपिटल गेन वो दिखा नहीं पाया है अपने रिटर्न के अंदर, अब वो उसको दिखाना चाहता है। तो पहले आफ्टर द एंड ऑफ द असेसमेंट ईयर देयर वाज नो ऑप्शन फॉर द असेसी टू फाइल दैट रिटर्न वॉलंटरीली व्हेन ही वांटेड टू फाइल इट। नाउ अपडेटेड रिटर्न में वो फाइल कर सकता है, उसमें उसके को पेनल्टी नहीं लगेगी और प्रोसिक्यूशन नहीं होगी। सो इफ अ मेंबर आस्क्स अस अ क्वेश्चन कि असेसी को क्या फायदा है, तो असेसी को फायदा ये है कि उस पर पेनल्टी नहीं लगेगी जो 270 कैपिटल ए में पेनल्टी लगती है, और प्रोसिक्यूशन नहीं होगा अगर वो अपना रिटर्न अपने आप वॉलंटरीली कंप्लायंस में फाइल कर देगा। सो दिस इज द गवर्नमेंट्स मोटिव ऑफ रिड्यूसिंग लिटिगेशन। वो ये नहीं चाहते कि हमारे पास इंफॉर्मेशन आए और हम उसको 148 करें और उसके बाद आप देख रहे हैं कि 148 में इंफॉर्मेशन करेक्ट है, आप उसको कंटेस्ट करते जाएं, अपीलेट स्टेजेस पे जाएं और फिर वहां काम हो। सो द गवर्नमेंट वांट्स दैट इफ यू वांट टू कम क्लीन and we are ready to accept your updated return provided some token of penalty, some token of additional amount of 25% to 50% ranging upon the time limit when the return is filed, updated return is filed, वो levy होएगी उस चीज के ऊपर। So this is what was in short and concise regarding the provisions of updated return, I suppose. अश्विनी जी, इसमें जो क्वेश्चंस होंगे वो यहाँ कर लें कि पूरा टॉपिक खत्म होने के बाद 44 क्लॉज 44 खत्म होने के बाद करेंगे?
मेरे इकट्ठे कर ली सर, पहले क्लॉज 44 भी कर लेते हैं, इकट्ठे क्वेश्चन कर लेंगे सर। हाँ जी।
सो अपडेटेड रिटर्न में आई थिंक आई हैव ट्राइड टू कवर व्हाट ऑल वाज देयर इन द न्यू सेक्शन ऑफ दिस अपडेटेड रिटर्न। एंड इसके अंदर अपडेटेड रिटर्न में एक चीज और बताना चाहूंगा, जो हम टैक्स कैलकुलेट करेंगे उसमें सपोज हम कोई और नई इनकम दिखा रहे हैं जिसपे TDS कटा हुआ है, तो उसका बेनिफिट भी आपको अपडेटेड रिटर्न में मिल जाएगा। कोई एडवांस टैक्स आपने पे किया हुआ, उसका बेनिफिट नहीं लिया हुआ है, वो भी मिल जाएगा। मैट क्रेडिट्स जो हैं वो भी मिल जाएंगे। बस आपको ध्यान ये रखना है कि इसमें रिफंड नहीं मिलना, रिफंड नहीं होना, या जो इनकम थी पुरानी उससे कम का रिटर्न फाइल करें, वो नहीं हो सकता। गवर्नमेंट वांट्स न्यू एंड मोर अमाउंट ऑफ टैक्स फ्रॉम दिस अपडेटेड रिटर्न। updated return के बारे में I think I've tried to cover the scope of the updated returns. Now moving on to the next topic for today's evening was regarding clause 44 of the tax audit report. As we all know, when the tax audit report was changed somewhere in 2018-19, then certain amendments were brought in the tax audit report in form 3CD. 3CD में clause 30C आया which related to 92E, and then clause 44 आया which related to provisions of GST, कि GST में जो expenditure हो रहा है उसको हमको कैसे अपनी tax audit report में from the tax auditor, the government wanted this information. So GST में जो provision, अच्छा अभी तक ये clause suspended चल रहा था, बार बार गवर्नमेंट नोटिफिकेशंस आते थे, CBDT के नोटिफिकेशंस आते थे, एंड दे सस्पेंडेड द ऑपरेशन ऑफ दीज टू क्लॉजेस टिल 31st March 2022. दैट मींस द ऑडिट रिपोर्ट्स व्हिच वर फाइल्ड टिल 31st March 2022, उनमें ये क्लॉजेस सस्पेंडेड थे। नाउ सिंस द ऑडिट रिपोर्ट फॉर फाइनेंशियल ईयर 21-22 हैज टू बी फाइल्ड ओनली आफ्टर 1st April, and today we are sitting on 16th of July when we have to file this audit report. So then we have to take cognizance of clause 44 also. Clause 44 starts with that what is the breakup of the expenditure which is done through entities registered under GST and unregistered entities. So the total expenditure which is there, you have to bifurcate that expenditure into the different columns, primarily where the expenditure relates to entities not registered under GST and expenditure in respect of entities registered under GST. So in दो broad heads में आपको अपना total expenditure divide करना हो. Now the question arises कि revenue capital, to my mind it would have both the expenditures, but अच्छा रहेगा कि हम revenue को अलग कर दें और capital को अलग कर दें. Expenditure का breakup नहीं करना हमको कि किस कौन-कौन सा different expenditure है, किस-किस head में किया है. The total expenditure has to be bifurcated. इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स ने अपना एक ड्राफ्ट एक्सपोजर गाइडेंस नोट दिया है टैक्स ऑडिट प्रोविजंस के ऊपर, एंड दैट ड्राफ्ट गाइडेंस नोट गिव्स अस सम लाइट एज टू हाउ वी एज चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट हैव टू डील विद दिस क्लॉज 44. सो दे आल्सो से that the total expenditure has to be given, headwise expenditure has not to be given as it is not warranted in clause 44 as it stands now. Now the total expenditure has to be bifurcated between two heads where the GST registered entities are there and where the entities which are not required to be registered under GST, they are there. Now further, when we break up clause the expenditure under GST entity registered entities, they say ki expenditure related to goods and services which are exempt from GST, that amount has to be shown. Then amount of expenditure related to entities falling under composition scheme, and then amount related to other registered entities. ये तीन columns के अंदर you have to divide your total expenditure, and then the total of the expenditures is required to be mentioned in clause 44 as prescribed by the Central Board of Direct Taxes. Apart from that, then they have the other column where the expenditure is not related to any registered entity under GST. Now, as we all know, GST is quite a cumbersome law. वहां आपको ये डिफाइन करना इंपॉर्टेंट है, गाइडेंस नोट में भी दिया हुआ है, गाइडेंस नोट में भी दिया हुआ है कि आपका जो entities हैं which are exempt from GST, first we have to see which all entities are exempt from GST which have to be mentioned. Section 2 subsection 47 Goods and Services Act का define करता है exempt supply. It says exempt supply means supply of any goods or services or both which attract nil rate of tax or which may be wholly exempt from tax under the IGST and includes non-taxable supply. So हमको सबसे पहले ये define करना है कि जो हमारा expenditure है वो supply है या not supply है, non-supply है. अगर वो सप्लाई की डेफिनेशन में आता है, देन फर्दर बाइफरकेट होता है कि वो टैक्सेबल है या नॉन टैक्सेबल है. जो शेड्यूल दिए हुए हैं, शेड्यूल 1, 2 और 3, शेड्यूल 1 इज फॉर गुड्स, शेड्यूल 2 for in under GST is for services, and schedule 3 is for goods or services which the GST Act says are neither goods nor services. So when we say that we are concerned with supply definition, then supply definition के अंदर आपको taxable और non taxable को देखना है, because taxable goods are there, goods and services are there जिसपे कोई rate of tax government ने define किया हुआ है, चाहे वो nil rated है, zero rated है, उन सारी चीजों को हम taxable supply मानेंगे. Non taxable supply government ने आज की तारीख में section 9 में define करी हुई है, which would be only petroleum products for a certain period of time and liquor for human consumption. वो उन्होंने नॉन टैक्सेबल सप्लाई बताया गया है. फिर अगर हम गाइडेंस नोट को देखेंगे तो उन्होंने वहां पे बोला कि डिफरेंट नोटिफिकेशंस आए हुए हैं if we see the notifications basically एक rate का notification है जो define करता है goods का, और services के लिए भी है, और जो exempt list है जहाँ पे GST नहीं लगना उनको define करता है. So ये जो 6-7 notifications guidance note में prescribe किए हुए हैं, they are basically related to goods and services and IGST, related to rate of tax and related to exempt supply. So we have to see when we are incurring any expenditure, so whether it is taxable or non-taxable, and how it has to be dealt with and mentioned in the tax audit report under clause 44. Now, as we all know that we as chartered accountant have to seek the information from the client for reporting purposes in clause 3CD. काफी सारे प्रोविजंस हैं क्लॉज 3CD में जहां हमको क्लाइंट से इंफॉर्मेशन लेनी होती है. सो वी हैव टू सी दैट दिस इंफॉर्मेशन इज रेडिली अवेलेबल विद योर क्लाइंट. उनके जो अकाउंटिंग सॉफ्टवेयर्स हैं उसके अंदर प्रॉपर बाइफिकेशन हो रहा है इस इंफॉर्मेशन का, एंड देन टू एक्सट्रैक्ट दैट इंफॉर्मेशन from the client, and then that information has to be reported under these different columns of the tax audit report. Then the fourth column in this clause 44 is in regard to expenditure relatable to entities following under composition scheme. हम सबको मालूम है GST के अंदर composition scheme भी है जहां पे आदमी एक पर्टिकुलर अमाउंट के ऊपर एक टैक्स पे कर रहा है जिसका आपको इनपुट क्रेडिट नहीं मिलता. तो वहां अगर कोई कॉम्पोजिशन डीलर है तो उसकी क्या GST के अंदर अमाउंट आ रहा है हमको कॉलम नंबर 4 के अंदर मेंशन करना है. एंड देन वी हैव टू मेंशन द अमाउंट रिलेटेबल टू नॉन अदर रजिस्टर्ड एंटिटीज जहां नॉर्मल रेट ऑफ टैक्स में आपने GST पे अमाउंट पे किया हुआ है वो आपको उसके अंदर मेंशन करना है. एंड देन द टोटल एक्सपेंडिचर डेफिनेटली. देन दे कम अप विद that amount relatable to not registered under GST. Those entities which are not registered under GST, उनसे क्या सामान खरीदा है आपने या क्या एक्सपेंडिचर किया है goods and services में, there it has to be mentioned. To my mind, जिंदल जी, जैसे आपने बताया कि पहले 2 वेबिनार्स हो चुके हैं, what is the discrete purpose of government in extracting this information from the tax auditor, that has to be understood, because nowhere it has been defined as to what is the exact purpose of extracting this information by the government here. As we all know, GST के अंदर, though I'm not an expert in GST, GST के अंदर they have all the information which is now readily coming up in GSTR 2A and 2B, जहां सारी आपकी परचेजेस, सारे आपके एक्सपेंडिचर्स आ रहे हैं. So that kind of information the government already has. Now they want to correlate this information with your actual trading and profit and loss account, manufacturing trading profit and loss account, whatever that is basically your debit side of your trading of your expenditures, as to what all expenditures हैं जो आप GST registered entities के द्वारा कर रहे हैं, और ऐसे कौन से एक्सपेंडिचर हैं जो unregistered entities के द्वारा आप कर रहे हैं. अगर हमको ध्यान हो, so when GST came up on 1st July 2017, the government had the notion of charging GST under RCM provisions from entities where we incurred the expenditure who were not registered under GST. That means जब हम unregistered entity से कुछ सामान खरीद रहे थे, कोई services खरीद रहे थे, then हम reverse charge में उनके ऊपर GST पे कर रहे थे. But because of all political compulsions या social economic compulsions, whatever we can say, these clauses were suspended, and then finally those clauses were amended, whereby the government said कि किसी class of persons के ऊपर जब भी वो लेके आना चाहेंगे reverse charge, वो लेके आएंगे. और धीरे धीरे करके हम देख रहे हैं जैसे सर्विस टैक्स में रिवर्स चार्ज की लिस्ट बहुत लंबी थी, यहाँ पर भी वो लिस्ट धीरे धीरे बढ़ती जा रही है. So the purpose of the government is here that expenditures which are being incurred उनको आप जीएसटी के द्वारा एंटिटीज, रजिस्टर्ड एंटिटीज के द्वारा खर्च कर रहे हैं या अनरजिस्टर्ड एंटिटीज के द्वारा खर्च कर रहे हैं, उस पे कोई डेटा गवर्नमेंट के पास आना चाहिए, जिससे कि वो अपार्ट फ्रॉम स्ट्रीमलाइनिंग एंड स्ट्रेंथनिंग द इनकम टैक्स डिपार्टमेंट, वो जीएसटी की डिपार्टमेंट की वर्किंग को भी स्ट्रीमलाइन और स्ट्रेंथन करें। As we all know that धीरे धीरे गवर्नमेंट हैज स्टार्टेड द ई इनवॉइसिंग। पहले 500 करोड़ पे थी, अब करते करते 20 करोड़ पे इनवॉइसिंग आ गई है, and as per media reports it might come down to 5 crore rupees also. So the total focus of the government is in extracting that information कि आप जीएसटी के इंफॉर्मेशन के अंदर, जीएसटी में जो खर्चा कोई एंटिटी कर रही है वो कितना एग्जेम्प्ट सप्लाई पे कर रही है, कितना नील रेटेड पे कर रही है, नील रेटेड एग्जेम्प्ट, और वो सब वहां जाएगा, कितना कॉम्पोजिशन डीलर्स पे हो रहा है एक्सपेंडिचर हमारा जो एक बिजनेस एंटिटी अपनी बुक्स में डेबिट कर रही है, और कौन सा एक्सपेंडिचर ऐसा है जहां नॉर्मल आपने जीएसटी पे किया हुआ है। सो दैट इज द फर्स्ट ब्लॉक ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन विच इज रिक्वायर्ड, एंड देन अनरजिस्टर्ड ब्लॉक इंफॉर्मेशन है। अनरजिस्टर्ड के अंदर इंस्टीट्यूट ने अपने गाइडेंस नोट में एक अच्छा क्लेरिफिकेशन दे दिया which states that where these supplies are not taxable, then which are mentioned in schedule 3 of the CGST Act, that was salary, buying land, etc., which were exempt supply, which were not treated as supply. So they have to be mentioned in the last column, which is column number 7 of the reporting function, which is there for us. So before this guidance note came, we were in a dilemma कि वो जो amount है जो supply से related है हमारा, जो supply भी की definition में आता नहीं है, schedule 1 और 2 में नहीं आता, whether that has to be anywhere shown or not to be shown. So now the guidance note institute draft guidance note, I would say, because institute ने comments मांगे हैं, and I feel that काफी लोगों ने comments भेजे हैं वहां पर. So the draft exposure guidance note states clearly at clause 82.6 that expenditure and transactions which are referred to in schedule 3, they have to be shown in the last column, that is column number 7, where entities which are not registered under GST are there those expenditures have to be shown. So these were the provisions related to clause 44. Now a billion-dollar question to my mind comes. We had internal discussions in our offices, plus we had internal discussions and discussions with other professionals also. There is another school of thought here. If this information is readily available, the problem with us as chartered accountants is that since अगर हम अपना form 3CA या form 3CB देखेंगे, which we as chartered accountants have to certify, have to mention, there it says कि balance sheet of profit and loss account तो आपका true and fair view दे रहा है, but जहां वो form 3CD के बारे में बात करते हैं, there they say the statement and particulars mentioned in form 3CD are true and correct. Now this word correct creates a bigger problem for us as chartered accountants. So when we say that some particulars or some information mentioned in clause 30 in form 3CD is correct, then we as chartered accountant are taking the full responsibility and onus that जो information हम आपको दे रहे हैं डिपार्टमेंट को extract करके from the assessees accounts दे रहे हैं, वो true और correct है. अब जब हम इसको certify कर रहे हैं कि true और correct है ये information, then you for yourself have to see that when you are auditing the accounts of an entity, whether the information provided in clause 44 by the assessee or his accountant, which is counter verified and cross verified and checked by you as chartered accountant, वो true और correct है कि नहीं है. अगर we are satisfied that the information given by the concerned entity is true and correct, then yes, to my mind, we should report it here. But yes, if we are not able to satisfy ourselves, then हमको क्या करना है? जिंदल साहब, ये एक बड़ा भारी क्वेश्चन आज की तारीख में आई थिंक इन चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स माइंड आ रहा है कि अगर इंफॉर्मेशन ट्रू और कंप्लीट नहीं है, ट्रू और करेक्ट नहीं है, तो वो क्या करें. So my understanding would be, and as the guidance note says also, not specifically in this column, but general description जो guidance note में है, वो ये कहता है कि where you are not able to form a correct opinion, then as per form 3CA and 3CB, जहां वो कॉलम्स आपके पास ऑब्जर्वेशंस क्लेरिफिकेशंस के आते हैं, वहां आप एक डिस्क्लेमर सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग डाल दीजिएगा. जैसे अगर आपको ध्यान हो, शुरू में जब TDS प्रोविजंस के ऊपर आया था, जब वो सेक्शन 40A IA के अंदर TDS के ऊपर पूछते थे कि कितना अमाउंट ऑफ एक्सपेंडिचर है, किस अमाउंट ऑफ एक्सपेंडिचर पे TDS कटा, किस पे TDS नहीं कटा, वहां भी एक सॉर्ट ऑफ डिस्क्लेमर हम डालते हैं, बिकॉज कॉन्ट्रैक्ट है, प्रोफेशनल है, वो ऐसा इतना बड़ा अमाउंट है कि हम उसको पूरे अकाउंट्स में से बाइफरकेट करके लिख पाना हमारे लिए मुश्किल होता है. तो वहां हम एक डिस्क्लेमर डालते हैं. ऐसी बहुत सी जगह, जैसे कैश पेमेंट में हम डिस्क्लेमर डालते हैं, चेक्स के लिए हम डिस्क्लेमर डालते हैं कि चेक्स आर इन पोजीशन ऑफ द बैंक, वी डोंट नो वेदर दोस आर अकाउंट पे चेक्स और नॉट. सो आल्सो टू माय माइंड आई फील वी कैन पुट अ काइंड ऑफ अ डिस्क्लेमर that this information is extracted as provided by the assessee, और अगर ये information बिल्कुल assessee provide नहीं कर पा रहा, then a disclaimer to that sort also can be worded and written in form 3CA and form 3CB, that the information which is required under clause 44, since वो information mandatorily required नहीं है for the assessee to keep under the Income Tax Act or GST Act, और रेडिली अवेलेबल नहीं है, या अकाउंटिंग सॉफ्टवेयर में वो इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल नहीं है, आई थिंक जिंदल साहब एक काइंड ऑफ अ नोट कैन बी मेड, एंड फॉर द बेनिफिट ऑफ द मेंबर्स एट लार्ज, maybe after the seminar we can have a discussion and a note can be prepared and circulated to the members, so that जिनको अच्छा लगता है ऐसा नोट डालना, वो अपने ऑडिट रिपोर्ट में 3CA 3CB में वो नोट डाल लें, डिस्क्लेमर वाला, जिससे कि योर ऑब्लिगेशंस एंड योर लायबिलिटी टुवर्ड्स द एंटिटी एंड टुवर्ड्स द गवर्नमेंट एंड इंस्टीट्यूट, यू आर टेकिंग केयर फुली दैट आपके ऊपर कोई भी कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट के अंदर या प्रोफेशनल मिसकंडक्ट के ऊपर कोई भी कार्रवाई ना हो, बिकॉज आपने एक डिस्क्लेमर दिया हुआ है. कीपिंग डेफिनेटली इन माइंड वेयर
सर आप सर्कुलेट कर देना, आई विल सर्कुलेट टू ऑल.
Yes, sure. After this webinar, I'll definitely circulate it so that it can be circulated to the members at large, and different kinds of notes can be prepared. आप उसको अपने आप देखकर कि हमें क्या चेंजेस करने हैं, उसमें कैसे हम चेंज ला सकते हैं, because to my mind, अगर we are not satisfied as chartered accountant of the information which has been given, provided by the accountant or by the entity, or even by our effort, we are not able to extract the complete information. अब प्रॉब्लम समझिएगा, एक इनवॉइस है, उस इनवॉइस के अंदर कुछ एग्जाम सप्लाई भी हो रही है, उस इनवॉइस के अंदर कुछ GST की सप्लाई भी हो रही है, तो आप उसको कैसे बाइफरकेट करके लिखेंगे? आप सारी इंफॉर्मेशन केवल 2A से लेके नहीं कर सकते. तो ये काफी सारी चैलेंजेस, प्रैक्टिकल चैलेंजेस हम लोग अब फील कर रहे हैं, फेस कर रहे हैं अपने ऑडिट के टाइम के अंदर, बिकॉज इस टाइम ऑडिट फुल स्विंग पर है, जैसा हम सब लोग कर ही रहे हैं. तो स्टाफ और हम लोग देख रहे हैं कि ये इन्फॉर्मेशन एक्सट्रैक्ट हो पाना, करेक्ट इन्फॉर्मेशन एक्सट्रैक्ट हो पाना बहुत मुश्किल हो रहा है. सो आई हैव अ फीलिंग दैट if we are able to write a disclaimer, even if we are giving the information that it is based on the figures given by the assessee, which we have test checked or we have counter checked, whatever is the scope of your audit and whatever depth audit की आपने करी हुई है, keeping that in mind, I think disclaimer देना या उसके बारे में लिखना form 3CA और form 3CB में आवश्यक है, as I personally feel. I think with this also I have tried to cover the provisions which were there in clause 44 of the tax audit report, which has come up and which is applicable for this year, as Jindal Sahab had requested me to take up. Question and answers शायद राकेश जी के उद्घोषण के बाद हो सकते हैं या भी हो सकते हैं. That is for the host to decide. I think with this I have tried to cover both the topics which were assigned to me for today. Thank you very much, Jindal Saab. Thank you very much, Rakesh sir. Thank you, participants, for having me here. And I'm there during the webinar also.
5 मिनट डॉक्टर साहब, हम एग्जैक्ट 6 o'clock शुरू करेंगे, तो 5
Sure.
मिनट में क्वेश्चन ले लेते हैं, अगर उसके बाद होंगे देन एट द एंड.
Sure, definitely.
सर, माय स्मॉल क्वेरी, प्लीज अनम्यूट कनव जी. कनव जी, आप हैंड रेज कीजिए, मैं अनम्यूट कर दूंगा. देन खैर शेरी कालरा जी का, कैन ITR U shall be filed under 2.5 lakh income?
सर देखिए, ITR 5 में उन्होंने साफ लिखा हुआ है कि रिड्यूसिंग लाइबिलिटी लॉस रिटर्न वो नहीं हो सकता. ITR 5 इसके अंदर कोई टैक्स का अमाउंट नहीं जा रहा. स्पेसिफिकली दे हैव नॉट मेंशन्ड दैट वेयर इट इज द टैक्सेबल इनकम इज नॉट देयर. उन्होंने इसे केवल ये लिखा कि रिफंड नहीं होना चाहिए, रिफंड एनहांस नहीं होना चाहिए. So to my mind, ITR can be filed where it is below 2.5, but what would be the utility of filing that? It does not seem to be there. जी.
सर, दूसरा क्वेश्चन रिफंड रिलेटेड ही है. What if assessee has not filed return? Can he file updated return having refund?
No, specifically no.
पर सर, अगर किसी का 20,00,000 का रिफंड है और 10,000 रुपये टैक्स बनता है, तो 10,000 भी नहीं रिफंड क्लेम होगा?
क्या चीज सर?
अगर 20,000 टैक्स डिडक्टेड है और रिफंड टैक्स पे करने के बाद 2-4 हजार का रिफंड बनता है, तो वो भी नहीं मिलेगा?
नहीं, उसने ओरिजिनल रिटर्न फाइल किया हुआ है कि नहीं किया हुआ?
अगर किया हुआ,
अगर ओरिजिनल रिटर्न फाइल नहीं किया हुआ, देन इस केस में रिफंड क्लेम करने के लिए अपडेटेड रिटर्न फाइल नहीं कर सकते.
नहीं कर सकते. ठीक है सर. Then can company file belated return? वो तो सेम प्रोविजंस ही हैं.
Yes, company can file.
Why
belated return भी, updated return भी.
Why utility is taking late fees as 5K instead of 1K if my income is less than 5 lakh?
सर, ये यूटिलिटी में प्रॉब्लम है कि वो पहले 1,000 रुपए था, वो 5,000 कर दिया गया था लास्ट ईयर से. तो आई थिंक वो 5,000 रुपए लेना चाहिए यूटिलिटी को.
A person has not filed ITR for 2021. His TDS was 1.6 lakh. How can he claim it now? इसमें अपडेटेड में नहीं कर सकते जी आप. उसके लिए तो
नहीं कर सकते,
अप्रूवल लेनी पड़ेगी.
हाँ, 119 में जाइएगा, अप्रूवल लीजिएगा, फिर आप कर सकते हैं.
What is the position of first time return when no tax is due? अपडेटेड रिटर्न में मेरे ख्याल में नहीं जा सकती सर विदाउट टैक्स.
जी बिल्कुल.
आशीष गोयल जी, is tax is required to be deposited where no tax is required to be deposited in both original and updated return? तो फिर तो जाएगी नहीं जी, अपडेट ही नहीं कुछ हुआ तो.
Yes. How would that be possible कि अपडेटेड रिटर्न और ओरिजिनल रिटर्न में टैक्स पेबल नहीं था आपका?
Is there any separate चलान for deposit of tax? मेरे ख्याल नॉर्मली होगा सर, वो तो सेल्फ असेसमेंट का
चलान है, नॉर्मल चलान है. 140B में कोई सेपरेट चलान नहीं आया है.
सर, विल इट इंक्लूड परचेज आल्सो? मेरे ख्याल में ये
यस क्लॉज 44 के संदर्भ में है. टोटल एक्सपेंडिचर के बारे में बोला, इंक्लूडिंग दी परचेजेस.
अगर एंटिटी GST से एग्जम्प्ट है तो क्लॉज 44 का क्या करें? तब भी निकालनी पड़ेगी सर वो तो.
यस, अगर 44AD में ऑडिट हो रहा है उसका, तो आपको निकालना पड़ेगा.
Whether
कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर टू माय माइंड शुड बी शोन एज अ सेपरेट लाइन आइटम. रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर एक कर दीजिएगा, कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर सेपरेट लाइन आइटम से आप कर सकते हैं.
In case details of clause 44 not maintained by the auditee entity or not possible to verify all details, then can comment to be given? Yes, वो आप शेयर कर दूंगा मैं जैसे आएगा. Purchase detail to be given हो चुका है क्वेश्चन. Then whether utility is there to mention while uploading? Yes, वो जाती हैं जो आपके ऑब्जर्वेशन है,
ऑब्जर्वेशंस होते हैं.
What should be चालान कोड? वो आपका आंसर हो चुका है. If the land is purchased from a builder who is registered under GST, where to be shown under column 3 or 6 of the clause 44?
सर, यहाँ पे लैंड जो परचेज किया है वो नॉन टैक्सेबल है. वो मतलब दैट इज नॉट कम्स अंडर द डेफिनेशन ऑफ सप्लाई. सो जो लास्ट कॉलम है, कॉलम व्हिच सेज दैट एक्सपेंडिचर इन रिलेशन टू रजिस्टर एंटिटीज नॉट रजिस्टर्ड विद GST, हमारा गाइडेंस नोट भी उसको बोलता है कि उसको आपको वहां दर्शाना है.
Assessee paid advance tax and TDS has been deducted but forgot to file return. can he pay additional tax on amount already paid?
Yes, यहाँ उसकी टैक्स की लाइबिलिटी बढ़नी चाहिए. There he can pay with a belated return, but refund नहीं मिलेगा उस केस में, ये ध्यान रखिए.
Can we request a waiver? No, sir. ये तो कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं हुआ. If original return is filed, then can updated return if there is a refund? वो हो चुका जी क्वेश्चन. If non tax payable, ये भी हो चुका जी. Then salary expenses has to be deducted in column 7 of the clause 44.
Yes, in clause 7, column 7.
Will benefit of 87 be available in the updated return? And if after that the tax is 0, ये हो चुका जी.
Yes.
Tax की बिना नहीं जाएगी. But about fixed assets,
Capital expenditure.
हो चुका जी. मेरे ख्याल में सर अगर कोई अब
थोड़ा कपड़ा मार के करनी पड़ेगी, कर दो
सर. मेरे ख्याल में ना हम ना एक काम करते हैं सर, अभी डॉक्टर साहब का शुरू कर लेते हैं. जो हैंड रेज वाले क्वेश्चन है ना, इट विल टेक टाइम, वो एट द एंड लेंगे सर. अगर आप अवेलेबल हो सर.
Yes, I am available, sir. I'll have the privilege of hearing Dr. Saab also.
Thank you, sir. I request Dr. राकेश गुप्ता जी, जैसे मैंने इंट्रोड्यूस तो सर को पहले कर ही दिया है कि ये किताब है जिनको अभी हमने पढ़ना है. आज हम थोड़ा सा पढ़ पाएंगे सर को, तो मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा डॉक्टर साहब को कि काइंडली स्टार्ट द डेलिब्रेशन सर.
थैंक यू.
और दिनेश शर्मा जी भी हमारे साथ जुड़ चुके हैं.
Thank you, Ashwini ji, for your very juicy introduction. I am beholden by that. It is a pleasure to me to be with all of you. And I listened Deependra very carefully. I mean, though I may not be filing return, but then it was very nice and treat to listen him. Friends, the topic which has been assigned to me, section 194R and 194S, which are the TDS provisions. And you all would have noticed that TDS provisions are increasing year after year. Hardly is there any year when the TDS family is not enlarged or expanded. The primary reason for such kind of adventurism on the part of the government is that it is the most economical method for the collection of taxes, at least at the end of the government. Though human service is provided by the taxpayers, by helping the government to mobilize and to collect taxes. But then the Damocles sword keeps on hanging on the head of the taxpayers, and even the slightest default, aberrations, deviations in the matter of compliance of TDS provisions, I mean, is handled with severe consequences. Now, had there been some other country, the back of the SSE would have been patted for this contribution. But this is not like this. So on the one hand, the government finds this tool as a very important economical tool for collection of taxes. At the same time, the SSEs find difficult to keep abreast with the fast-paced changes which are there. There are, as I mentioned, the Damocles sword is always kept on hanging on the head of the taxpayers. And then kindly see a series of consequences for the non-compliance of the TDS. And since 194R and 194S, these are the latest two additions in this family of the TDS. Therefore, those consequences now become all the more acute and keen. So an SSE may be held to be an SSE in default for not deducting the tax, or even if he is deducted for not paying it to the government treasury. And because of that, the tax may be collected from him, and not only the tax, but then the interest, and that too at very high rate, as compared to the rate of interest which is paid back by the government on the refunds of the assessees. Now that is also leviable. Then there is a penalty under section 221. There is a penalty under section 271 capital C. So in the matter of the non-deduction or the short deduction of tax, the penalties are even to the extent of the rule of double jeopardy. Penalty under 221 as well as penalty under section 271C. For one default, now there are twin penalties, maybe for the different purposes, because 221 penalty is for the reason that the assessee has withheld or has not paid the due tax, whereas penalty 271 capital C is for the default of non-deduction or the short deduction. Be that as it may, now with this background, let us start with 194R and 194S. Now since the time finance bill later on became a Finance Act have introduced these sections, there have been several webinars and seminars, and most of us are well aware about the plain provisions of law, and not only the plain provisions of law, but then the nitty-gritties also. So let us see now where do the talks which I am making would land myself. So 194R was added by the Finance Act 2022, and when this was laid and this was part of the finance bill, then the explanatory memorandum gave the background of its introduction. Now I am discussing about the background, and in that process I am referring to the memorandum for the purpose, because when the interpretation of any section takes place, then there are certain important aids, and memorandum explaining the provision of the finance bill is one such aid. Similarly, the finance minister's speech is another source of interpretations of a provision. There are several aids which are used, which are deployed by the courts to interpret a provision. So this memorandum explaining the provisions of the proposed section 194R, now that becomes and that assumes importance. And that memorandum starts by referring to section 28 clause 4 and saying that value of any benefit or amenity arising in the business or in the exercise of profession received by a person, whether that is converted in money or not, is liable to be taxed. But then the persons in receipt of such benefit or perquisites may not be declaring such benefits or perquisites, and thereby furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Therefore, in order to widen and broaden the tax net, now this provision 194R, as the explanatory memorandum said, is proposed. Honorable Finance Minister also made a speech almost on these lines, that these benefits and perquisites somehow are not captured because they are not offered by the recipient of such benefits and perquisites. But then when we read the fine print of the proposed 194R or the finally enacted 194R, there is complete absence of any reference to this section 28 clause 4. Therefore, we will come to that aspect as to whether section 28 clause 4 now can be taken aid while interpreting the effect and impact of section or interpretation of section 194R. Now this section is not very lengthy. It has got 3 subsections. And the substantive section is subsection 1. And we'll quickly go through the section and then we will come to the nitty-gritty and the nuances of the section. Now it says any person responsible for providing to a resident any benefit or perquisite. And kindly see, each word in this subsection 1 now has got meaning. And as it is always known that the legislature always uses the expressions with some purpose. We cannot take the user of the expressions by the legislature as the surplusage. So it says that any person responsible for providing to a resident any benefit or perquisite, whether convertible into money or not, arising from business or the exercise of profession, by such resident shall, before providing the benefit or perquisite, would ensure that the tax has been deducted at the rate of 10% of the value of such perquisite or benefit. So 10% tax has to be deducted on the value of the benefit or perquisite provided to a resident by a person who is providing such benefit to such resident, and such benefit or perquisite must arise out of a business or as a result of the exercise of a profession to the resident, and whether such benefit or perquisite is convertible to money or not, and the tax rate at which the deduction is to be made is 10%. That is what the sum and substance of subsection 1. Then comes the proviso, and proviso now provides for a mechanism where the benefit and perquisite is not wholly provided in cash, or if it has been provided partly in cash or partly in kind, then how the liability of the tax under subsection 1 has to be ensured that it is paid before extending or before providing. So the proviso says that where it is the benefit of perquisite is provided wholly in kind or partly in cash or in kind, and the cash component is not enough to discharge the tax deduction on the whole of the benefit under the subsection 1, then the person who is responsible for providing any benefit or perquisite would ensure before releasing the benefit or perquisite to the resident that the tax on such benefit or perquisite now is deducted, and he should ensure before releasing the benefit or perquisite. Then subsection 2, it provides a threshold, and the threshold is year and the resident. It is qua year and qua resident. That qua resident and qua financial year, if the value or the aggregate value of the benefit of perquisite is not in excess of rupees 20,000, then the provisions of section 194R would not apply. Then the third proviso exempts from this obligation to such small individuals and HUFs now whose gross receipts or turnover or sales, if they are carrying on business in the financial year preceding the financial year in which this obligation has arisen, does not exceed rupees 1 crore. And if such individuals and HUF are carrying on profession, such individuals are carrying on, HUFs cannot carry on profession, if such individuals are carrying on profession and the professional receipts are not more than 50 lakhs of rupees in the financial year preceding the financial year in which this obligation has arisen, so the provision subsection 1 will not apply. Now we will come on the nitty-gritties of the various expressions which have been used under subsection 1. But then one more trend now which is visible, which is evident in the provisions enacted by the Finance Act successively year after year is that a power is sought to be arrogated by the board under such statutory provisions that if there is any difficulty that arises in giving effect to the provisions of this section, then the CBDT has been given this power to issue guidelines for the purpose of removing the difficulty, but then of course after obtaining the prior approval of the government. And then such guidelines are supposed to be placed before both houses of parliament. And once that is done, then these guidelines will have the binding effect on the tax department, of course, and on the persons who are responsible for providing benefit or perquisite. Now, based upon this power which has been so taken by the board under subsection 2 and subsection 3 of section 194R, the board has issued guidelines, and these guidelines are issued on 16th of June 2022. Now, since these guidelines will go a long way in helping us to understand or to misunderstand the impact, import and effect of the provision of subsection 1 of section 194R. Therefore, we will start our deliberations from subsection 2 and subsection 3 of section 194R. Now, as I said, that there is a very distinct trend in various sections which of late are enacted under the Income Tax Act, whereby the board seeks to arrogate these powers to issue guidelines. That may be for the reason that under section 119, if a circular which is issued by the board may be binding on the tax authorities, but then the courts have held that they are not binding on the taxpayer, much less on the courts. Therefore, it appears that such kind of powers are sought to be given in the act itself, so that the binding effect of the circulars on a segment of the taxpayers may be recognized statutorily. That may perhaps be the reason. That is why such kind of powers are arrogated. Now, in that light, now kindly see, but then this power which was arrogated by the board was highly restrictive, in the sense that this was in order to remove difficulty. Therefore, difficulty in giving effect to the provision of the section. So this difficulty which was envisaged under subsection 2 was with respect of the implementation of the provisions, not on the interpretation of the provisions. Whereas we will find a little while henceforward, when we will go into the so-called guidelines for so-called removing the so-called difficulties, that the difficulties which have been so perceived by the board, which have impelled and compelled the board to come out with circular, deals more on interpretation and less on the implementation. And rather, if I am permitted to say that instead of removing the difficulties, these guidelines at places, at times, and those times are not less, but most of the times have created difficulty. So, and I am so sure that this circular or the guidelines may be called in question before the court. And when these guidelines will be called in question before the court as to their ultra vires character, then it will be pressed on behalf of the taxpayers. Now, on what basis? Because if a power has been given under the statute, then it has to be seen whether that power has been exercised having regard to the explicit language or expression which have been used by the legislature. So when the legislature says that if the difficulty arises in giving effect, then what was the material based upon which, because this section or the real implementation of the section had not come into existence or as on the day when this board circular was issued. Therefore, a serious question will be raised as to on what basis the board issued these guidelines when there was no occasion for anybody, much less the board, to see or to give effect to the provision of the section, to perceive the difficulty in giving effect to the provision of the section. So difficulty arises. Difficulty must arise, but the anticipation of difficulty or the anticipation of the self-imposed or self-created or self-perceived difficulties probably may not be the basis for the board to come out with the circular or the so-called guidelines. And then, as I said, subsection 2 clearly says that those guidelines must be for the purpose of removing the difficulty, and therefore it has to be seen whether the explanations or the guidelines which have been so given by the board in the circular are really for the purpose of removing the difficulty or for creating the difficulty. Now, another problem which I foresee when the circular will be called in question before the court. Now, what was the basis, what was the material which was placed before the central government before its approval was taken? Because as all of us know that whenever there is any approval taken from any higher authority or from any legislative body, there has to be some material which has to be placed, and that material must be germane, must be relevant, it must have some nexus, and therefore, and its germaneness, its relevance, its nexus is subject to judicial scrutiny. Now, it cannot be held back on any ground, and therefore, if approval of the central government was sought before issuance of the circular, therefore it also must come in the public domain as to what has led the board to impress upon the government before its approval was sought, and therefore that must come either in the public domain or when it will be called in question. Then of course I am so sure that the court will compel the respondents to bring out, at least before the court's knowledge, as to what was the material which has gone into the minor, which was put. Because if you remember, under the Income Tax Act, there are several provisions wherever the approvals are required, maybe from the statutory authority, but then the approval is approval. Approval cannot be in vacuum. Any action at the end of the board or on the part of the government now has not to be in vacuum. There has to be some basis, and that basis is subject to judicial review. And therefore, when a statutory provision is being enacted that contains the provision of the prior approval, and that approval is called in question before the court, it will be incumbent upon the respondents to bring material before the court to satisfy the conscience of the court that here was the material based upon which this approval was obtained from the government, and then it will be subject to the judicial scrutiny by the courts to see and to be satisfied that whether it is germane, whether it is relevant, it has got nexus or not. So far as the binding nature, it may be binding on the tax department, like even section 100.
Sanjay ji has also joined CCM.
Sanjay ji, namaskar.
Sanjay ji.
So CBDT circular which is issued under section 119, they are also binding on the tax authorities. But here it is being specifically statutorily enacted that they are binding on the tax authorities and on the persons providing the benefit of perquisite. But then it is not binding on the person who is supposed to offer the value or the aggregate value of this benefit of perquisite in his return of income. He can take a position that it is not includable in his income on n number of grounds, which are available to him in law. So to that extent. Now, having now so said about subsection 2 or subsection 3, now let us see any person responsible for providing to a resident. So person responsible for providing the benefit now has been given a special meaning, but then that doesn't take us anywhere. Now it has been explained by way of an explanation which has been appended at the end of section 194R. Defining person responsible for providing means a person providing such benefit of perquisite. So the person who is providing the benefit of perquisite now is required to deduct. So if there is any other person in the chain who is merely performing any administrative or as a role of a conduit, now person responsible would not encompass within its meaning such kind of a conduit. So if any foreign trip is being organized or the benefit of the foreign trip is being extended by a company and by virtue of such benefit being given to the business constituents, the foreign tickets are being organized or booked through some agent. That agent is acting as a conduit. Now he cannot be, or agent cannot be said to be a person responsible for providing. So therefore, to that extent, person responsible providing means a person responsible providing the benefit of perquisite. So there has to be direct, proximate, inextricable link between the person providing the benefit to the recipient of that benefit. Then to a resident. So if that benefit or perquisite is being extended to non-resident, that is not contemplated for the purpose of section 194R, that benefit or perquisite must be provided to a resident. Only then, and that resident may be not ordinarily resident, because it doesn't say, it says resident. So any benefit or perquisite is being provided by any person to a resident, but then it must be arising from business or exercise of a profession. Now these two words are very important, that benefit or perquisite must arise from the business or the exercise of the profession. So there again has to be a nexus, rather the direct, proximate and inextricable nexus with the benefit that must have nexus with the business or the profession of the resident. And therefore, the person responsible for providing the benefit may not be carrying on the business, but then the recipient must receive it while carrying or while exercising the profession, or it must arise during the business, or it must arise from the business. Any benefit or perquisite. Now the word benefit and perquisite have not been defined, and therefore we will have to bank upon their meaning in the common parlance. Benefit, any advantage which is given, and that is why, since no definition has been given, and therefore its dictionary meanings now will have to be seen, and there may be wide variety of difference in the perceptions, and that would call for interpretation depending upon the facts of each case, whether this kind of an amenity can be said to be benefit or perquisite or not. That will be the subject matter of intense litigations times to come. It may be a feast for those chartered accountants and lawyers who are neck deep into the litigations, like Sanjay ji, like Atul ji, and others. But then, as a citizen, it doesn't augur well that legislature has kept these two words open-ended, and thus inviting interpretational issues in times to come. The challenge is substantial. So benefit or perquisite, and whether convertible to money or not. And this itself calls for and has called for interpretations by the courts in the past. Because this language, as I said, the memorandum also made a reference to section 28 clause 4. Memorandum may not have made reference to section 2 clause 24 subclause 4. Memorandum may not have made any reference, now deleted section 40A small 5, because the section is no longer there on the statute. But then the languages which have been used in these three sections by and large are identical, and therefore it is not as though these phrases or these words which are there in section 194R have not come up for interpretation before the court. The words and the phrases which are there under section 194R1 now have been interpreted by the court, maybe in the context while interpreting section 28.4 or section 2 clause 24 subclause small 4. But then we will see a little while henceforward that those interpretations have been given a toss by the board in the name of removing the defect. So any person responsible providing to a resident any benefit or perquisite, whether convertible to money or not, arising from business or profession, shall, before providing such benefit, deduct tax at the rate of 10% on the value of the aggregate value. Now, even this value, what will be the value of the benefit? Now that itself, though is sought to be addressed, but then that addressal which has been made by the board in these guidelines is as vague, as oblique, as so many other things. So even what is the value of such benefit or perquisite, that also now will be called in question by the tax authorities and by the deductor when it comes to the litigation. Then, as I said, there is a proviso, first proviso, second proviso, third proviso, and therefore let us see now in the light of the board's circular purportedly removing the difficulties as to what are the effects of the answers of various questions. Now, first of all, I would like to point out one very important dichotomy, now which has been resorted to by the board, or which has scrapped in this guideline. Now, board has taken the diametrically opposite interpretational techniques while giving its interpretations to various questions. In question number 1, the board has resorted to the rule of literal construction. The meaning of literal construction is that we will see the law in terms of the language which has been employed by the legislature. We will not see here, we will not see there. So if section 28 clause 4 is not there, it may be there in the memorandum. It may have been referred obliquely by the finance minister in a speech. But since section 194R does not use the expression or does not use the section 28 clause 4, even if it may have used those very expressions which are there in section 28.4, but since section 28.4 has not been used in section 194R, board's stand is that we will use the rule of literal constructions. We will not see anywhere else. We will not go in the purport and object. So since 28.4 is not there, therefore we will disregard 28. Whereas, while replying to question number 2, now they say the intention of the legislature, and where from they are gathering that intention of the legislature? From the language of the first proviso to section 194R. And they say that since the legislature has used partly in cash or partly in kind, therefore, if an amount of benefit or the value of benefit of perquisite is wholly paid in cash, now that is also intended by the legislature to be covered. So, while subsection 1 speaks of rule of literal construction, whereas, question number 1 of the guidelines speaks of rule of literal construction, whereas question number 2 or answer number 2 now speaks of the purposive construction, rule of purposive construction, that we have to find out the intention of the legislature. Now, this is something which is inconsistent, and if it comes from the board, that too on the strength of the powers which have been arrogated under subsection 2 and subsection 3, then it calls for, some amount of debate. So, question number 1, board clearly says that since there is no reference to section 28.4 in section 194R1, therefore, under which section the amount is taxable, may be taxable, may not be taxable in the hands of the recipient, the deductor is obliged to keep his eyes shut. It may be taxable under 28.4, it may be taxable under section 41.1 or under any other section. And fortunately, the board has not spelled out that section. But then that section which has not been so spelled out seems to be obvious, section 56 to 10. So, question number 1, the answer, insofar as the board is concerned, is very loud and clear that the deductor, the person providing the benefit of perquisite, is supposed to keep his eyes shut as to its taxability. It may not be taxable. It may be taxable under any sections of the Income Tax Act. So far as the deductor is concerned, he has to see straight and he has to deduct. That is what the reply which has been given. But then what kind of difficulty? What kind of difficulty? Who was having that difficulty? Probably the board itself was having this difficulty. Otherwise, for the taxpayer, there was no difficulty. And now kindly see the audacity. Now, in order to buttress this kind of interpretation, the board has resorted to the reference of section 195 and says that since the language which has been used in section 195 is differently worded, Now it says that any sum chargeable to tax under this act, and therefore a deductor is required to find out the taxability under the Income Tax Act first of all. And then since section 195 uses the expenses rate in force, and as per section 2 clause 37 capital A, the definition of rate in force, I would compel the deductor to make a reference to the treaty in order to find out its very chargeability and the tax rate in case of its chargeability. And since there is absence of those kind of expressions in section 194R, therefore our interpretation that as the board has given in reply to question number 1 says that whether it is taxable, under which section is taxable is of no consequence insofar as the person providing the benefit. And then in the same breath, then section 194E has also been referred, and the decision of PILCOM. Again, in order to buttress this kind of a reply which is given in response to question number 1, that even under section 194E, now such kind of language which is there under section 195 was not there, and therefore the language of section 194E according to the board was more or less in perimeteria with section 194R, and therefore since Supreme Court has interpreted in PILCOM that in the absence of the language of section 195 having been deployed in section 194E, therefore the deductor has not to see anything. But then the reference and context of 194E was entirely different. That was a case again of the non-resident athletes of the non-resident sports association. Therefore, this distinction that person who is receiving the benefit in whose hands the received things may be taxable is resident or non-resident, that is a very material difference, because the non-resident after the receipt of income now may fly outside the jurisdiction of the Indian tax authorities. But then the residents now are always on your radar. Therefore, and then how can one ignore the very taxability of any amount now before invoking the provisions of the TDS? Now you cannot put the cart before the horse. Now it is a mode of collection of the tax. There has to be tax first of all. There has to be tax on income first of all. How can there be, and of late there is a tendency, and widespread, the tendency is not, there's a widespread tendency to provide for the deductions of tax and collections of tax on such amounts which by no stretch of interpretation can be said to be income. Now their objective is to capture a transaction. Though they may be having several other independent and much more, including sections under which the transactions may be captured. Reporting requirements may be there. But TDS provisions now may be for the purpose of reporting, but then definitely it must comply with at least that basic threshold that it has to be on income. Section 4, how can that be ignored? Section 190, which is there at the threshold of the TDS chapter, which is the first section of the TDS chapter, how can that be given a go by? How can the section be thrown for a toss? The other day, I was seeing section 206C. Now, one of the clauses for collection of tax is that if you are remitting payment outside India beyond a particular threshold is not very substantial, 7 lakhs of rupees, then the authorized agent or authorized dealer is supposed to collect the tax apart from the amount which is being remitted. And if that amount is for the purpose of feeding one's children for the purpose of studies, and that amount is by way of raising loan, then there is a lesser amount of tax collection. Now, kindly see, if a person is raising the loan from the bank to supplement or to support his or her son or daughter for that matter, then on that loan, the tax is required to be collected. Therefore, of late, there is another distinctive trend now which is being noticed, is that the TDS and TCS provisions are disregarding even the basic concepts of TDS or TCS on income. Out of over-indulgent behavior to somehow capture the transactions, even with respect to the residents. On the one hand, we claim that we have got 360-degree profiling, and all residents are on our radar, as dear Deependra was referring about the clause 44 of the tax audit report, that we have made our entire law and the compliance requirement in such a manner that one thing is caught, I mean, from several angles. And on the other hand, now we are making these provisions of TDS and TCS at least by putting the cart before the horse, whether there is income or no income. Now, if you are doing this, then you are required to withhold the tax. So this is something now which also may be looked into by the court when these kind of provisions are called in question before the court. Now that takes us to answer to question number 2. And if you remember, a little while ago I made a reference to interpretation to the phrase whether convertible into money or not. Now, in the context of section 28 clause 4, because of the identical user of this expression, now this phrase came up before the court, and that too before the highest court of the land, and not in a very distant past. We are around 440 or 45 ITRs. It is in 404 ITR in Mahindra and Mahindra. There, the issue was whether the waiver of loan now would be hit by section 28(4) because their assessing officer invoked section 41(1). Obviously, 41(1) could not have been invoked because in order to attract section 41(1), there has to be some deduction on account of any expenditure or alliance. And since in case of the waiver of loan, now such jurisdictional conditions for invoking 41(1) did not exist. Therefore, an alternative contention was raised on behalf of the department was that nonetheless it is a benefit derived by a person arising during the course of business, and therefore it should be taxable under section 28(4). And the department then brought it to the notice of their lordships specifically. So the expressions which have been used is whether converted into money or not. Now that shows whether this benefit is convertible into money or not, meaning thereby even if that benefit is not convertible into money, then also section 28(4) now should be invoked and should be pressed. Now that was specifically repelled by the lordships in para 8 of the decision, and by saying that the way it is being interpreted by the board to mean that benefit received wholly in cash is also in by section 28(4), it's not like this. Therefore, this interpretation was there, and this interpretation overruled the decision of the Madras High Court in Ramaniyam's case. In Ramaniyam, Madras High Court took a diametrically opposite view. Now that decision was overruled, and by specifically dealing this argument conversed on behalf of the revenue, that whether converted into money or not probably suggests that benefit can be wholly in cash. But then no reference to the decision has been made. While answering this question, now where the benefit is wholly in cash, now whether the tax is required to be withheld under section 194R, and the answer is that since the first proviso to section 194R(1) uses the expressions partly in cash or partly in time, that shows the intention of the legislature, and therefore the benefit and perquisite which is wholly in cash. So what is the message? That if it is partly in cash, then also the board says, then the section 194R(1) says the tax is required to be. So when it is wholly in cash, then why not? Because whole is larger than the part. That was the argument now which found favor. But then while giving answer to question number 1, you chose to go by the rule of literal construction. Here you want to go by the rule of purposive construction. But then kindly see again Why not rule of literal construction? Because first proviso uses the two expressions, wholly in kind or partly in cash or partly in kind. Wholly in cash now has not been said in that. So how can at the level of board be so inconsistent in its approach, and that too not in a distant past? Question number 1 and question number 2 are contiguous to each other. So this wholly in cash or wholly in kind, or whether converted in money or not, the interpretations placed by the highest court of land, not in a very distant past, very recently, now has been brushed aside, has been placed under the carpet without making any reference at all to that decision, is something which is, and that is why when this circular will be called in question before the courts, I can say that all these kind of things will be canvassed before the court. Question number 3. Now, if the benefit of perquisite is the form of the receipt of a capital asset at the end of the recipient, then obviously the answer is that if it is the receipt of the capital asset, then the value of that benefit in the form of the capital asset, now that would suffer the tax, and in the hands of the recipient that will be taxable. And 6 instances have been given while replying to question number 3, and all 6 instances are based on the judicial decisions. And with that Ramaniam's decision, which I was referring while making reference to answer number 2, I mean, has also found place. But then kindly see, Ramaniam's decision now has found place, but then Mahindra and Mahindra, no reference has been made. Now, how can the board, which is the highest administrative body which administered the tax laws, can be so lopsided in its approach? Now, question number 4. Sales discount, cash discount, rebate allowed to customers from the listed retail price. And then kindly see a very high stand taken by the board while answering this question. They say, though these are the lesser sales realization, but then, and these are benefits. Now kindly see the height. These are the lesser sales realizations though, but then nonetheless these are the benefits, and therefore in the ordinary course tax withholding should be there. But then since it will create problems at the end of the sellers, and therefore as a magnanimous approach, it is being clarified by way of these guidelines that no tax is required to be there. Now a couple of things which I want to make here. Now first of all, now cash discount now has got nothing to do or cannot be said or cannot be equated to the lesser sales realization. Quantity discount, trade discount, I can understand. Rebates also I can understand, but then the cash discount is given for the purpose of realizing the money early, and cash discount factors the time value of money. Therefore, to equate cash discount with trade discount and then to put it that this is a lesser sales realization, it is not lesser sales realization. It is a discount which is given as an incentive for extracting the payment early, and it factors the time value of money. But anyway, but then sales discount, cash discount, rebates allowed to customers from the listed retail price. Now, listed retail price, definitely it is a lesser sales realization, but then board says that it was a benefit tax in the ordinary court should have been deducted, but then to mitigate the difficulty, I mean, we are giving this guideline that tax is not required to be deducted. But then kindly see, now it says that this situation is different when the free samples are given in the course of the business. Now, I have not been able to understand. Now, free samples, but then free samples, particularly to the doctors. Now, how can that constitute a benefit of perquisite to the doctor? In the next para of this answer to question number 4, 4 instances have been given, but with this caveat, then this list is not exhaustive. And one of them is that when a person gives medicine samples free to medical practitioners, then that will constitute benefit of perquisite, meaning thereby the person who is providing. In fact, this medical profession and this pharmaceuticals company came under scathing successive attacks. Amendments were made under section 37 by inserting explanation 3. Then came the Supreme Court decision in Apex Laboratories. Then 194R, and particularly the answers on the lines of question number 4. Now, therefore, I mean, medical practitioners and pharmaceuticals companies, they have come under the scathing, that to the successive scathing attacks. But then person gives medicine samples free to medical practitioners. Now, I have not been able to fathom, because whenever these samples are given to the medical practitioners, I mean, it is written very boldly that they are not subject to sale, they are not meant for sale. And we have seen in a practical life, the medical practitioners, they give those samples, I mean, to their near and dears, or for that matter to the patients, I mean, and for that they do not charge. Therefore, to say that free medical samples given to medical practitioners will amount to benefit or perquisites, and in that process the tax is required to be withheld, is something which then dual taxability or the dual deduction of tax at source, that where the person who would ultimately so-called enjoy that benefit now is not during the course of business. So if these benefits or perquisites are enjoyed or are given to the entities, but then they're enjoyed by its directors, partners, or employees. So 194R, because the board has clarified in reply to question number 4, that these persons enjoy the benefit because of the relationship with that entity. And therefore, this benefit in a way is to the entity, and therefore the tax has to be deducted. And thereafter, now this will be allowed as an expenditure. And since these benefits have been given to those employees, and therefore if there is a taxability under section 192, or there is a tax withholding obligation under section 192 as a perquisite to the employee, then the deduction has to be made. Now, was there any necessity to create these many difficulties by providing such kind of explanations? Now is something now which needs to be pondered over. Then comes the valuation of the benefit perquisite, question number 5. Now this starts, the answer starts with this, that the fair market value will be the basis for valuing. But then 2 exceptions have been carved out. Fair market value has not been defined, but then the fair market value, if it has been defined under section 2 clause 22B of the Income Tax Act, the valuation of that benefit will have to be made, that the price at which, I mean, such capital, but then kindly see, I mean, that is meant for the capital asset, it is not for any other thing. So whether 222B in respect of any item other than the capital asset can also be priced in service. I mean, that now you cannot resort to rule 11U, because that has got a specific application of section 56, and for 50C or 50C or 50CA, those cannot. Rule 3 cannot be applied, because that is meant for the valuation of perquisites in case of the employees. So fair market value of the benefit of perquisite, now that itself is a very dicey, and instead of removing the difficulty, now there will be lots of difficulties in times to come, which I mean we all would face. But then 2 exceptions which have been carved out, that if that benefit of perquisite has been purchased by the benefit provider, then the price of that purchased benefit or perquisite shall be the value, I mean, on which the deduction of tax has to be made. And if that benefit provider is the manufacturer who manufactures, I mean, that benefit, then the price it charges to its customers. Now kindly see, price to its customers. So manufacturer, there may be chain, there may be dealers, there may be sub dealers, then the ultimate retail customer. So price at which is charged to its customers. So which customer? That will also be the subject matter of interpretation. But then plausible interpretation probably may be the immediate channel, I mean, which is there in the form of the dealer or sub-dealer, whosoever is there for that manufacturer, the price which is charged from that, that will be there. Then, of course, GST will not be included for the purpose of valuation of benefit of perquisite for TDS under section 194R. Now, this is something, I mean, after a very long recess, we have found some amount, genuine amount of magnanimity when it says that the GST will not be included for the purpose of valuation of benefit. Then social media influencer is given the product by a manufacturing company. Then the very first line of that answer says that it is a facts specific. It depends upon the facts and circumstances of each case. So far, so good. But then the next guideline which is provided is that in case that product is retained by that social media influencer, then its fair market value now will be the value of this benefit. It will be treated as a benefit and the fair market value of that product. And kindly see the examples which have been given. Cosmetics, outfits. I can understand the car, I can understand the telephone, mobile, but then outfits and cosmetics, I mean, will they be of any use to somebody else? But then they say that if these are retained, and suppose the decision to retain is taken after its exhaustive use for the purpose of influencing the social media, then at which point of time its fair market value will have to be seen, in which year it has to be seen, the deductions liability will have to be seen at which point of time. Now all these questions I will keep on nagging and which elude answers and are amenable and prone to litigation. Then reimbursements. Now reimbursements explanation is really very fantastic explanation. Now if the reimbursements can be the benefit. Now if I have to understand certain basics, then probably I'll have to go into my classes of the original classes. I'll have to go to the classes in my primary schools. Reimbursement. And then the nature of reimbursement will change in case that bill is in the name of that service provider or bill is in the name of that person who is giving that benefit, so-called benefit, or for whom I mean the services are retained. Now reimbursement cannot be said to be any benefit for any intents and purposes. And there are whole category of judicial decisions which say in the context of section 194C, 194J, that if they are pure and simple reimbursement, because reimbursement does not have any element of income, and therefore to clarify that too in the name of removing the difficulty that the reimbursements will also be treated as benefit of perquisites, calling for the withholding of tax under section 194R is something very, if I am permitted to use that expression, is bizarre. Dealers conference. The strange character of the clarifications do not here. The buck does not stop, it goes further. Dealers conference. That if the prime purpose of that conference is to disseminate information about the product, to tell about the features of the product, launching of some new product, and 5 or 6 items have been given. So if the prime object of the dealers conference is on those lines which have been listed, then it's all right. But then kindly see the further caveat. But it should not be in the form of any incentive by way of holding such conferences to select dealers based upon the achievement of the target. Now you ask me, suppose if I got 100 dealers, few of them do not perform. For me, they are the spent force. Now, why should I be ask them to attend the dealers conference? Now the board will tell me as to how should I conduct my even such basic business. As a student of law, we have always been taught that a person who is sitting in the armchair of a businessman should not be dictated as to how the business is to be done. And then the prime objective of this conference was to educate the large number of dealers, barring some of the dealers who have not performed well. Why should I invite them? It is not a social organization whereby I am called upon as an obligation to carry each and everybody with me in my business. But then if it is like this, then the value, then this very so-called this very expenditure on dealers conference then will constitute benefit or perquisite as per the clarification given by the board. And then you see further caveat that it must not have any leisure component. If it is a leisure trip, I can understand. If it is a trip to the family members, I can understand. But then it must not comprise any leisure component. Now, clarifications are there to create a smoke, ambiguities. Now, how would that component be worked out? How would its value be worked out? What is the meaning of the leisure component? I mean, there is some musical evening with the dealers conference. Like what to say a dealers conference, we chartered accountant lawyers, when we go for the conferences, now after the hectic day schedule, in the evening the gala dinners are organized, and there may be some additional amenities now which are factored in the room rent, or the room rent is bargained in a manner that those facilities or amenities in the hotel will be given free of cost. Now, whether those amenities can be said to be a leisure component, and then its value, now how will its value be worked out? Be spread over the large number of the dealers? I mean, much can be said. And then prior stay or post stay should not be there. Now, prior stay, now even we chartered accountants and lawyers, if we go on any conference, then we try to reach a day earlier. Can it be said to be within the prior? Because the assessing officer would say it's binding on me, it was binding on you. Since in this conference so many dealers have come a day earlier, it's a prior stay. And there may be issues of connectivity, there may be other issues, logistical problems. And therefore, then you would classify them as prior stay or the overstay, I mean, beyond the dates of conference, and therefore there is a leisure component, or it will constitute the benefit of perquisite. So, the chaotic. Then, if it is paid in kind or paid partly in cash, partly in kind, then this person who is providing benefit must ensure that the tax is paid. And for that, the explanation has been given that the person who is in receipt of the benefit, now he should provide some evidence that he has paid the tax, and then he should offer a challan. He should supply the challan, and based upon which, I mean, the benefit of perquisites can be released. So these are the issues, or these are the questions relating to section 194R. Now 194S is no different, but then virtual digital assets taxability have come to be codified, which was not codified earlier, and which was giving much more. But then nothing is clear even in this context. And so far as the taxability is there, section 115 BBH has been made. Section 115 BBH has been made to say that whenever the total income of an SSE includes any income by way of transfer from the virtual digital assets, then that income has to suffer tax at 30%. And then no deduction on account of any expenditure or alliance or the loss of set off will be allowed against such income. And if there is a loss in the transfer from this virtual digital assets, that will not be allowed to be set off against any other income. It will not be allowed to be carried forward. So many ifs and buts and so many riders and caveats have been made that in the words of Kabir, it said, "Sar sar ko gahe lahe, thotha de udaye." So that is what section 115 BBH. And अभी कबीर का मुझे नाम याद आया तो मुझे याद आया, I had an occasion to write one poem on 194R and 194S, and in that probably I have used this expression, "Sar sar ko gahe lahe, thotha de udaye." So Ashwini ji, while giving my introductions, probably forgot this, that I do write poems also.
कभी कभी वाली किताब लिखना भूल गए।
अश्विनी जी अगली इंट्रोडक्शन में याद रख लेना।
नहीं, अभी ऐसे हो गए ना, 24 पेजेस का प्रोफाइल और 3 पेज की कविता, 27 पेजेस के बाद आपको पढ़ना पड़ेगा।
नहीं, there is a reason, plausible reason why did he forget? Because there is no such concept of removing difficulties in my Hindi poems, and Punjab Hindi is a problem, and yet there is no clause by which any power is arrogated to remove any difficulty in Hindi. That is why he forgot. 194S now is a mechanism provided by the Finance Act 2022, in which a person responsible for paying to any resident any sum by way of considerations. Kindly see, 115 BBH spoke of the income from the transfer of virtual digital assets, whereas section 194 has cast an obligation on any person responsible for making payment of any consideration in respect of the transfer of virtual digital assets. Maybe the tax deduction is 1%, but then it is there, and this liability is on the person responsible for paying to any resident. And then its proviso now again speaks of when it is wholly in kind, partly in cash, partly in kind, or when it is wholly by way of exchange or virtual digital assets, then the person responsible for paying, I mean, such consideration would also ensure, now before making payment of such consideration, that he should deduct, or he should deduct 1%. Now there is no provision which would be applicable in respect of the tax or TAN number under section 203A and 206AB. I mean, those provisions will not apply. And threshold, I mean, it's not substantial, but then the threshold is dependent upon whether you are a person responsible making payment is specified person or is a person other than the specified. So a specified persons have been defined, a person who is carrying on business, who is not carrying on any business profession, or individual actually if they are carrying on business and if their turnover or the payment aggregate value of the consideration does not exceed 50,000 rupees, is a specified person. Then for them there is no requirement of the deduction, and in case of a non-specified person the threshold is 10,000 rupees. And then circular has been issued under 194S also, because those kind of powers which are there under in 194R also exist in section 194S in the form of subsection 6 and 7, that in order to remove the difficulty, whenever difficulty arises while giving effect to the provisions of this section, then the board can come out with guidelines, and the guidelines have come by way of circulars of yes, this circular is again dated 22nd of June, and there are 6 questions which have been answered as to who has to deduct, at which point of time to deduct. That if this transaction is from peer to peer, from buyer to seller, then of course the buyer is responsible person for withholding the tax. But in case this payment is made or this transaction has taken place through or on exchange, then there may be situations whereby several persons otherwise may be required to withhold tax, and therefore this difficulty, I mean, would have arisen, and therefore it is sought to be provided in this circular that in case the transaction or the transfer of the VDA is on or through exchange, and then if the seller is making payment, if if the exchange if the exchange is criteria of making payment to the seller, and then the exchange has to withhold. But then if that asset is owned by broker, so several permutations or combinations which have been made as to in which circumstances, in which situations, and who has to withhold tax. That is what the question number 1. And question number 2 answers is there where there is exchange, or when the amount of consideration is partly in cash or partly in kind, or is by with exchange of another virtual digital assets, then who has to withhold at which point of time. I mean, that is the answer to question number 2. Then question number 3, when there are parallel provisions 194Q, I mean, which is also applicable, then says that if the tax is deducted as 194 as that 194Q, I mean, may not be pressed. Regarding the GST, says that the net of GST, the deduction, I mean, the net of GST, consideration of transfer of VD shall be on gross basis after including GST commission, or it shall be on net basis. So the net basis will be the basis for the deduction. Now, in case of the payment gateways, now it is sought to be clarified that the payment gateway now is not required to deduct, and there are certain compliance requirement of obtaining some confirmation certificate which has to be taken, and then multiple stage deductions may not be required. And then 194S regarding the threshold of the financial year because of the transitional, because 194R and 194S now have come into effect on 1st July 2022, and therefore how the threshold limit now will have to be calculated, that has been given in 194R also and 194S. And now it is again sought to be clarified by one circular that gift card or vouchers etc. will not constitute a virtual digital asset. So in virtual digital assets, I have never dealt with virtual digital assets. I have never dealt in cryptocurrencies. Therefore, I mean, my knowledge for the character of these virtual digital assets is very minimal. And with this, I'll end my this deliberation. If there are questions, then I would be pleased to answer. Thank you from the core of my heart.
Thank you very much, sir. I now request all the participants they may ask their questions, either may be related to 194R or S, or ITR U, or clause 44 of the tax audit report.
अश्विनी जी, मेरे 2 क्वेश्चन राकेश जी से हैं।
सर एक
Q&A में है।
Q&A वाले पहले ले लेते हैं सर। तो will total payment made to registered parties include prepaid insurance from registered parties?
I could not follow the question.
सर आपने शरी जी आप जा तो अनम्यूट होके पूछिए। If no taxable,
ये क्वेश्चन क्लॉज 44 के लिए है। The querist wants to ask total payment made to registered party include prepaid insurance from registered parties. Prepaid insurance, as I can see, is not an expenditure. वो एडवांस दिया हुआ है आपने इंश्योरेंस कंपनी के लिए, जैसे एडवांस सैलरी हो गई और टाइप्स की चीजें हो गई, डेटर्स को एडवांस दिया हुआ है या क्रेडिटर्स को एडवांस दिया हुआ है. So it is not an expenditure. So once it is not an expenditure, so it will not come under clause 44 for this year. Next year, definitely it will come there.
Whether depreciation expenses also to be reported under clause 44?
Sir, depreciation to my mind is an allowance. It is not an expenditure. So once it is an allowance, so that expenditure would not come in clause 44 itself.
Sir, next question is utility is not taking the additional interest 25%. How to pay then?
Sir, you can understand income tax return preparation utility hai, day by day change ho rahi hai, but definitely the act says that it has to be additional tax and interest on that additional 25% has to be paid. So interest has to be included.
Where to show transaction in security shares in clause 44 of the TAR?
Sir, if the querist wants to ask कि the person is having a business of shares and securities, then yes, अगर आप GST में registered हैं या GST में registered नहीं है, even then the breakup of the expenditures has to be shown. So it has to come up there.
ITR U is for updated return क्या? Yes.
Yes, yes.
Whether
depreciation you have done.
हो चुका है, done. Then भारत रत्न जी का है return filed with the rupees 1000 as income for the financial year 2021. Income actually was rupees 10 lakh. Assessee got refund also. How to show the refund received which is now required to pay.
Sir, section 140B सबसेक्शन 2 क्लॉज बी में दिया हुआ है कि जो रिफंड दिया हुआ है उसको आपको वापस, जो रिफंड मिल चुका है आपको, उसको कैलकुलेशन में वापस आपको लेना है. So the refund which you have taken, मतलब you cannot show the original amount of tax paid as tax paid for comparing additional tax. So that refund paid has to be zeroed down.
Presentation will be available on YouTube ji. Whether amount paid by the company to dealer for promoting their product like extra employee costs. Doctor साहब आपके related है sir.
Sorry, हाँ. What is
whether amount paid by company to dealers for promoting their product like extra employee cost or sharing of rent covered under 194R for TDS purpose?
Yes. So these are the benefits which are given in cash, and the recipient now is receiving them and is arising in the course of business. Therefore, the tax withholding requirement will be there.
Then sir, इनका है आगे question कपिल जी का, whether interest-free loan provided to dealer is covered under this section.
Now, regarding that interest-free loan, though ostensibly it appears to benefit, but I remember there is a decision 243 ITR in Supreme Court in VM Salgaonkar's case, now which says that this is notional benefit, it will not be hit by section 28(4). So we can take help of that decision, though in some quarters this view has been expressed that yes, it is benefit and its market value will have to be seen. But according to me, one can avoid the applicability of 194R, but then the dispute cannot be ruled out.
What if a chartered accountant filed tax audit or ITR without consideration to relative or any other resident? निशु जी, आपका क्वेश्चन किसके रिलेटेड है वो क्लियर नहीं हो रहा. आई थिंक आप अनम्यूट होके पूछ लीजिए. सर यू कोट
टैक्स ऑडिट के लिए है ये.
सर यू कोट कबीर, प्लीज एक्सप्लेन इट्स मीनिंग.
तो मैं सुनाई देता हूँ. मैं सुनाई देता हूँ.
जी जी.
हाँ. करेला नीम चढ़ा ये कानून किसने गढ़ा? 194R. करेला नीम चढ़ा ये कानून किसने गढ़ा? एक सेक्शन नया आया है, सेक्शन 194R कहलाया है. धारा की पैनी ही धार है और गहरी इसकी मार है. आओ पहले तो समझते हैं, झगड़ा बात के लिए रखते हैं. है प्रावधान करने वाला हैरान, किसी को व्यवसाय के दौरान यदि कोई बेनिफिट मिलता है और ये 20,000 से आगे बढ़ता है तो 10% की दर से TDS कटेगा उस पर से. नहीं कटा तो देने वाला कटेगा, ब्याज अलावा टैक्स भी भरेगा और पेनल्टी लगने से भी डरेगा. यहाँ तक कुछ ठीक ठाक है. आगे सफर ना साफ पाक है. एक बना है प्रत्यक्ष कर बोर्ड, हमारा बोर्ड जो है, एक बना है प्रत्यक्ष कर बोर्ड, बोर्ड नहीं है अप्रत्यक्ष मिलॉर्ड. कठिनाई दूर करने के लिए थमा दी उसको एक सोड. उसने जारी सर्कुलर क्या किया? दिमागी सर्कुलर कर दिया. भरे पूरे बनाए हैं 10 सवाल, पर यह सवाल है या बवाल? सवालों के बावले दिए उत्तर हैं. हम अच्छे बने घन चक्कर हैं. हम कभी कानून को पढ़ते हैं, सर्कुलर ऊपर नीचे पढ़ सड़ते हैं, नीचे जाकर ऊपर चढ़ते हैं, फिर भी कानून नहीं पकड़ते हैं. वैसे मतलब तो हमारा स्पष्ट है, उनके उत्तर प्रत्युत्तर स्पष्ट है. सर्कुलर कुल धारा से आगे है. सर्कुलर इज इन एक्सेस ऑफ द स्टैट्यूटरी प्रोविजन. सर्कुलर कुल धारा से आगे है. अपन को समझ नहीं लागे है, जिसको समझ आए समझाना है, अपने लिए तो बीन बजाना. अपना दिमाग तो दही बना है, ऐसे कानून के लिए नहीं बना है.
वेरी नाइस.
मैं सबको अनम्यूट कर रहा हूँ. डॉक्टर राकेश गुप्ता जी को आप क्लैपिंग के लिए सबको अनम्यूट किया है. थैंक यू वेरी मच सर. अब अगले क्वेश्चन लेते हैं सर. म्यूट ऑल कर दूं 1 मिनट, तो आप भी हो गए सर. आप अनम्यूट हो जाओ एक बार. डॉक्टर साहब आप भी अनम्यूट हो गए सर. डॉक्टर साहब अनम्यूट कर लीजिए. हाँ जी, हाँ जी. तो सर नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन है सर, इज रिटन राइटिंग ऑफ अ डेट आल्सो ए बेनिफिट सब्जेक्ट टू TDS सर? डॉक्टर साहब,
writing of the debt is not a benefit provided. So if you are writing off the bad debt, now this is not provided by the person, by the creditor. So it will not be the benefit which will be hit by section 194R.
Sir, next question है, can a non-taxable return be filed as updated return?
Sir, जहाँ non-taxable return है, because no more tax would be paid to the government, so non-taxable return cannot be filed as updated return.
Sir, next question है, sir, if distributor insists that he need gift item like LED value 60,000, but ask for rebate and discount through credit note, sir, is TDS need to be deducted?
But then he should not correlate it with that since he disclaimed, that benefit, and instead of that he has asked for this 60 or this discount through credit note. I mean that kind of correlation should not be there. So according to me, that even if the credit note is issued subsequently, but the real effect and the result at the end of the day is that it is a lesser sales realization, and therefore there should not be any tax withholding requirement of that.
जय हिंद गुप्ता जी, वी आर रिम्बर्सिंग ओशन फ्रेट टू दी, बस यहाँ तक के क्वेश्चन है सर। दूना साहब आपका, कमलजीत जी आप द्वारा पूछ सकते हैं अनम्यूट होके, ओशन फ्रेट रिम्बर्समेंट के रिलेटेड है सर मेरे ख्याल में।
ये बाद में दोबारा आ गया क्वेश्चन सर।
अच्छा जी, वाई यूटिलिटीज टेकिंग लेट फीस एज 5K इंस्टेड ऑफ 1K, वो हो चुका है जी। कैन कंपनी फाइल बिलेटेड रिटर्न, ये भी हो चुका है जी। देन वेदर बैड डेट्स रिटर्न ऑफ टू बी इंक्लूडेड इन क्लॉज 44?
The clause 44 में bad debt because expenditure है, so it will definitely be included there.
What about the assessee on whom GST is not applicable? Sir, applicable हो ना हो सब पे वो आपको
देना है, information देनी है, clause 44 की information देनी है।
आ गया जी, कंवल जी दुन्ना जी का क्वेश्चन आ गया। जय हिंद गुप्ता जी, वी आर रिम्बर्सिंग ocean freight to the service provider. They raise a bill of supply on us and we reimburse the amount. Do we need to deduct a TDS under 194R?
You are reimbursing, so they say that such kind of reimbursements are benefit, so therefore you are required to withhold.
Can loading and uploading charges can be said as benefit in TDS under section 194R?
What kind of loading and unloading? I mean,
ये आप आदित्य जी काइंडली इसको मोर क्लैरिफाई कीजिए। देन 194R, ये आगे क्वेश्चन ही नहीं है। प्रोविजन ऑफ एक्सपेंसेस, हाउ टू डील फॉर क्लॉज 44?
Clause 44, provision of expenses are there. So when they are debited in the books of accounts, if it is a provision, if it is a assured liability, then yes, provision for TDS and clause 44 applicability would definitely be there once it is debited to my profit loss account.
सर पीपीटी को ही हमारे स्पीकर्स ने प्रेजेंट नहीं की है, सो पीपीटी विल नॉट बी अवेलेबल, हाउएवर यूट्यूब लिंक आपको मिल जाएगा, आप उसको सुनिए पूरा सर। Whether a player trip to dealers by the company on achievement of sale target will be covered in 194R?
Yes.
Player trip तो covered है ही जी। Then अगला क्वेश्चन है, if due to change in income my refund reduce, so can this type of return be updated in ITR U?
Yes, because change of income, the refund has reduced. Definitely it can be there, but it cannot generate a refund. So if you have not filed a return, you cannot reduce the refund. So that would be the problem over there in updated return.
Assessee claim TDS for 2021-22 short of actual TDS available for the year. Can refund be taken and how? No, ये तो
no, income has to be shown first.
If CA permanently place its staff at client place where staff is providing free lunch, will 194 be tracked?
So, but then be rest assured the clients would not show it
as lunch given to staff.
Yes, as lunch given to staff.
मगर सर जनरली वो ऑडिट एक्सपेंसेस में डालते हैं।
हाँ, ऑडिट
एक्सपेंसेस में डालते हैं।
सर थैंक यू वेरी मच। क्वेश्चन
मेरे क्वेश्चन है, आप
हम लेके क्वेश्चन है, एक तो पैनलिस्ट के और अगर किसी का हैंड रेज है तो पहले आप पूछ रहे हैं जी, फिर मैं वो उनको अनम्यूट करूंगा।
सर ऐसा है, you were telling that the department is using the provisions of tax deduction for purpose for collecting tax even in those cases where it is not due,
Yes.
like cash withdrawal, tax on cash withdrawal. I think tax deduction TDS provisions are being used to control the evasion of tax. And in doing so, they are overdoing and overstepping. I think that
You're
needs
right.
to be curtailed. Somewhere they are doing overdoing it.
Yes.
There are many provisions like cosmetics and this outfits are to be returned back to the supplier. I mean, how can a open bottle of this cosmetic be returned back? Otherwise, it will be perquisite. It will be benefit, and 194R will be applicable. I think one more trend which is there, I have recently seen. It is like central side that income tax is being now they are trying to make it notification based tax. 194R is a small section, then the guidelines, a big 10 question answers.
Yes, yes, you're right. Yes,
Notification based taxation, they are trying to do that.
They say this is called indirect legislation.
Indirect
अतुल
legislation.
जी आप क्वेश्चन पूछिए अपना सर.
दीपेंद्र जी नमस्कार. मेरा आपसे क्वेश्चन है, दो क्वेश्चन है मेरे.
जी सर, जी सर.
एक तो ये है कि the detailed information we have to verify, it cannot be made available by the assessee unless his software supports it.
Yes.
Right? Secondly, in large cases, if you have to authenticate the correctness of the document or the details, then you will have to go through each and every invoice. Is it practically possible?
Sir, as I said, even the software, leave aside the software, this preparation should have been done from 1st April 2021. Because when we are feeding into the software, maybe Tally or whatever software you are using, whatever invoices are being fed into that, at that point of time, flags have to be raised according to these columns. कि जब हमारी रिपोर्ट निकल कर आए at the end of the day or at the end of the period, तो वो रिपोर्ट हमारी इसी तरीके से निकल कर आए. एंड उसी को देखते हुए मैंने अपने एंड में कहा था कि if we can give a disclaimer to it, and then definitely the second part of your question, कि as an auditor, how can we verify the correctness of the information given by the auditee, that whether he has given the information as true and correct. See, the paragraph used in Form 3C A and B is that Form 3C information is true and correct. It is not true and fair.
Right.
तो अगर हम true and correct के लिए उसको कहते हैं कि yes, this information is there, and वो information में कुछ गड़बड़ है, कुछ गलती है, then definitely we are under the light of professional misconduct, either by the institute or by the income tax department or whatever. So I would say even if the information is being provided under clause 44, then also a sort of disclaimer that we have verified this information or we have not verified this information, but we have based our opinion on the data given by the client, but because of the voluminous of the information, we are not able to verify it. So I think disclaimer is essential to be given in Form 3CA and 3CB.
Do you think the disclaimer will serve the purpose?
सर अतुल जी एक मिनट, सत्य प्रकाश जी आप क्वेश्चन पूछिए, उनका बार-बार अनम्यूट हो रहा है सर.
सर एक बात बताइए, जब प्रोविजन करेंगे आधा इस साल में आधा उस साल में, कैसे रिकंसाइल कर पाएंगे आप?
सर देखिए, इसके अंदर रिकंसिलिएशन तो कहीं है ही नहीं, बिकॉज ये जो इन्फॉर्मेशन आप क्लॉज 44 में दे रहे हैं, इसका रिकंसिलिएशन आपके जीएसटी से भी नहीं हो रहा, जीएसटी रिटर्न से भी नहीं हो रहा, बिकॉज रिटर्न में सारी इन्फॉर्मेशन आपकी जीएसटी की इस तरीके से नहीं आ रही है. सो बेसिकली इन्फॉर्मेशन टोटल एक्सपेंडिचर की आ रही है. तो जब तक आप एक्सपेंडिचर को रिकंसाइल नहीं करेंगे, एटलीस्ट कम से कम एक पार्ट तो आप रिकंसाइल करके रखें कि हमारा जो एक्सपेंडिचर है क्लॉज 44 में, वो मेरे P&L और ट्रेडिंग अकाउंट से कहीं ना कहीं मैच कर रहा है या उसमें रिकंसिलिएशन बना हुआ है मेरा. सो दैट इज व्हाई प्रोविजन किया है अगर एक्सपेंडिचर का, सो इट हैज टू कम इन क्लॉज 44 एज टू माय लिमिटेड अंडरस्टैंडिंग, आई वुड से.
अतुल जी पूछिए क्वेश्चन नेक्स्ट.
उसके बाद इसके अंदर ये है कि ऑलमोस्ट इन एवरी प्रोडक्ट जीएसटी इज एप्लीकेबल.
यस.
एंड एक ही पार्टी का किसी में 8% है, 5% है, किसी में 12% 18 है. अब उसकी ब्रेकअप, क्योंकि ये डिफरेंस तो आएगा ही आएगा. देयर इज नो वे दैट 100% रिकॉन्सिलिएशन कैन बी मेड. So do you think that disclaimer will maybe save us, but will it serve the purpose for which this clause has been introduced?
Sir, the clause has been introduced not to take the 8%, 12%, 5%, उसमें bifurcation नहीं करना हमको amount of expenditure पे bifurcation करना है under the different columns कि composite supply क्या है, exempt supply क्या है और कहाँ GST लग रहा है, क्या rate of GST लग रहा है, उसका bifurcation मेरे को नहीं करना. So there the total expenditure should cross tally with your financial accounts. So there, if a disclaimer is given and we are not satisfied about the correctness of the entire data, then definitely the disclaimer would help us out. The guidance note, not specifically under clause 44 says so, but generally the guidance note of the institute also says so, where we are basing our opinion on the auditee's detail only and have not been fully verified, then disclaimer needs to be given. आप कैश पेमेंट में क्या करते हैं, डिस्क्लेमर देते ही है ना सर. So there somewhere the skin is being saved. अगर हमने डिस्क्लेमर नहीं दिया हुआ तो I don't think the skin would be saved of the chartered accountant. राम बांसल जी क्वेश्चन पूछिए अपना सर.
सर अगर ये डाटा रिकंसाइल ही नहीं हो रहा है थ्योरेटिकल रिटर्न के साथ, what is the purpose of putting this column?
So the purpose somewhere of the government is to see कि आप unregistered dealer से कितना purchase कर रहे हैं, what percentage of your expenditures are there from unregistered persons and what type of expenditures are there from unregistered persons, so that, as I said in my deliberation, that when the RCM came initially on unregistered purchases, so does the government wants to bring it back, or what is the level and authenticity of your expenditures? That can also be a reason कि कल को कास के रीजंस के अंदर ये निकल के आने लगे कि इतना परसेंटेज एक्सपेंडिचर अगर आपका अनरजिस्टर्ड से है, then we should take it up for task. But then the mute question comes up, because salary expenditure वगैरह, that would definitely go in unregistered column number 7. So how the government would be bifurcating it, or they need to re-modify and classify this clause 44, I think time will tell us.
राज पावा जी आपका क्वेश्चन था सर.
गुड इवनिंग सर.
सर लेंगे. हाँ जी, आपका क्वेश्चन है सर राज पावा जी.
हाँ जी सर, one of the members was telling that he filed a return of income, updated the return with the tax payment of 25 rupees only. How it can be possible?
सर इनकम 100 रुपए के आसपास इनकम उसने बढ़ा के करी तो 25 रुपीस का रिफंड आ गया, सॉरी 25 रुपीस का टैक्स आ गया. सो
मतलब कहने का भी वो उसने पहले 5 लाख से
कोई सॉफ्टवेयर एरर हो, वो किसी मेंबर ने फाइल की है, मे भी सॉफ्टवेयर एरर भी हो सकती है अभी. नहीं सर, ऐसा मैं जहां तक समझता हूं उसमें ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि उसने पहले 5 लाख से ऊपर की रिटर्न भरी हो, क्योंकि 5 लाख से कम तक तो टैक्स लायबिलिटी बनेगी नहीं.
जी
ऐसा हो सकता है ना कि पहले 5 लाख से ऊपर की बनी हो, उसके बाद 100 रुपए या 50 रुपए बढ़ा के भर दी.
वो तो सर प्रैक्टिकली पता नहीं है इनका सॉफ्टवेयर क्या करता है. जी जी.
तो राज्य अगर वो 100 रुपए बढ़ाएगा,
5 क्वेश्चन है, कोई और में वो लेंगे, उसके बाद इंक्लूड करेंगे सर. Can loading and unloading of goods charges paid by the buyer to the seller can be said as benefit paid as reimbursement to seller and TDS to be deducted? Can loading and unloading of goods charges, सर वो जनरल एक्सपेंसेस ही हैं, वो reimbursement benefit कहाँ से हुआ?
No,
डॉक्टर साहब.
हाँ, it will not be, it will not.
Then एक क्वेश्चन है on clause 44. Can we say checked on test basis? वो तो सर अपने ऑब्जर्वेशन में जो मर्जी लिखिए, वो आपको डिस्क्लेमर भेजेंगे, उसको अकॉर्डिंगली मॉडिफाई कर लें. आपको मैं सर्कुलेट कर दूंगा जो भेजेंगे डिस्क्लेमर, तो आप उसको जैसे मर्जी चाहें उसको मॉडिफाई कर लें आप. देन पेट्रोल एंड डीजल एक्सपेंसेस टू बी शोन एज रजिस्टर्ड और अनरजिस्टर्ड एक्सपेंसेस एज ऑल दीज पेट्रोल पंप्स आर रजिस्टर्ड अंडर जीएसटी. बट वो पेट्रोल और डीजल तो जीएसटी में कवर्ड ही नहीं है,
नॉन टैक्सेबल है वो. दैट इज अ नॉन टैक्सेबल सप्लाई as per the CGST Act. That is a non taxable supply up to a particular date, so that will not come over there, that has to come up under unregistered place.
अतुल जी अगर कुछ है तो जल्दी पूछ लीजिए सर, कंक्लूड करना. और ऑलरेडी हम 734 पे हैं.
मेरे राकेश जी से 2 क्वेश्चन है. एक तो ये है कि फॉर मर्केंटाइल पर्पसेस if this benefit and perquisite we credit at the close of the year, so it amounts to almost payment, then what will be the status?
No, providing means the actual providing mere creditor, and without, I mean, what kind of benefit, you kindly explain it further.
Oh sorry.
म्यूट हो गए सर।
जैसे गिफ्ट वगैरह उन्होंने असेसी ने, हमारी क्लाइंट ने, उन्होंने कुछ घड़ियां, कुछ सूट पीसी वगैरह लेके और उसके बिल वगैरह ले लिए, जो डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करेंगे बाद में।
तो इस फैक्ट्स में तो हो गया।
हाँ हाँ
इस फैक्ट्स पे तो हो गया, यहाँ पे काटना होगा।
ठीक है सर। सर मैं कंक्लूड करें सर, क्योंकि वी आर ऑलरेडी लेट। थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर ज्वाइनिंग अस। तो संजय जी हमारे सेंट्रल काउंसिल मेंबर हमारे साथ जुड़े हुए हैं। सर आप 2 शब्द कुछ कहना चाहेंगे?
नहीं, डॉक्टर साहब का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। डॉक्टर साहब ने इतना प्यार से और कविता के साथ जो है उसको समझाया। ये नया स्टाइल आ गया डॉक्टर साहब, आपका यूनिक है। आप ऐसे ही अपनी कविताओं से सबको प्रफुल्लित करते रहें। प्रभु से प्रार्थना भी करेंगे, और जितने भी पैनलिस्ट आए हुए हैं अपना उनका सबका थैंक्स भी करता हूं। और मैं एक बार फिर कहना चाहूंगा कि आई एम स्टिल 24/7 अवेलेबल। अगर आपकी कहीं भी किसी तरीके की कोई भी ऐसी क्वेरी हो, इंश्योर से रिलेटेड कोई पॉइंट हो, तो जरूर बोलें। गाइडेंस नोट पब्लिक हमने डोमेन में डाला हुआ है। आपको उसके 15 दिन पूरे होने वाले हैं, क्योंकि इसके बाद ये 12, 13, 14 तारीख को काउंसिल के अंदर लाया जाएगा। तो आपकी अगर कोई डिफिकल्टी है तो जरूर उसको कमेंट डालें, क्योंकि आपके कमेंट जो हैं वो हम उसको अपनी कमेटी में लेके उसको आगे काउंसिल में लेके जाएंगे। So this is what I wanted to say. Otherwise, after a long time I have joined. I am thankful to each one of you, especially the speakers of the day and the panelists. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू संजय जी। पहले तो मैं तो इतना ही कहूंगा, डॉक्टर साहब पहले तो इनकम टैक्स वालों को मतलब कहते हैं लपेट लपेट के ठोकते थे कोर्ट में, अब वो मतलब कविताओं के थ्रू भी ठोकेंगे।
Poems are very good these days. बहुत अच्छी पोएम लिखने लगे हैं डॉक्टर साहब। थैंक यू सो मच।
थैंक यू वेरी मच। आज हमारे डॉक्टर साहब पार्टिसिपेंट भी बड़े अच्छे, अबाउट 300 रहे। तो इट वाज ए नाइस एंड नाइसली डेलिब्रेटेड सेशन बाय बोथ ऑफ द स्पीकर्स। इधर में भी दीपेंद्र मोहन जी और डॉक्टर राकेश गुप्ता जी। ऑल्दो हमारा 7 o'clock का टाइम था, वी आर एट 7:40, मतलब पूरा 2 घंटे 40 मिनट के लगभग ये सेशन चला है। एंड इट वाज ए वंडरफुल सेशन। थैंक यू वेरी मच। थैंक्स टू आवर फैकल्टीज फॉर स्पेयरिंग द टाइम। थैंक यू वेरी मच सर।